Still don't have a
Harbor
Troller
Town is
Games
an all-new
video.
series from Miniature
No,
Building
okay,
Authority,
haven't said
the
no
leader
yet.
in tabletop gaming scene. Unique, flexible, and playable. Harbor Town will take your games to its
There you go. Perfect. Yeah.
Eric, our shtick is we talk over ads, so there you go.
Yeah, we just
You
babble
can
on.
chat now
From-
and chat at the end. It's all right, man.
Yep.
And I'm like putty in your hands.
Awesome.
Yep.
How do you kill the video?
I know
You pop out the chat. There's a little cogwheel at the bottom of the chat, and you
Oh, I
can
see.
pop out chat, and then you can kill the whole window with the video and just keep the chat.
Such a good idea.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Anna.
Yeah, because Jay has in Zoom you will see the Twitch stream.
Yeah, what you're
in
seeing
real
is
time
is
without
live.
delay.
Yeah.
Yeah, without
So,
delay.
Instead of a delay.
Yeah.
Oh, ready for some record numbers, David Leonard? Well, I don't know, man. We'll see. We'll see.
Yep. Yep.
Leonard still holds the record for on.
What is the
That's
record?
I had
50 or
Leonard
something
came
like
on
that,
and had a
300.
142 average, which is the third highest show ever.
Pretty good, man. I won't pull those kind of numbers.
Anna's Gary Con,
My seminar was like something very close to that.
145 to 147, and a seminar I had on streaming with 2 other channels was 157 at Gary Con. That was the highest.
Wow.
So,
Building, yeah. It's not bad for being like 3 shows a week.
I think we may get as many as 40 people today. I may pull as many as.
We will get 100 at least.
Oh, we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think we're gonna do a little bit better than that tonight.
Oh yeah, we might break 200. Yeah.
We'll see.
Yep.
I need a new Reaper vid too.
Yeah. But that's a good thing with sponsors. They are supposed to provide you with the
Yeah, I
videos.
know,
That's
but
the
they don't.
Yeah.
Although I got these 2 from Stratagem WizDice, so. Gary's awfully quiet. That's a little scary.
I've been told you shouldn't waste good material before the show.
Hey, he just hoists the fucking banner of Bone March and we're
Yeah. And he looked burnt too. It's like it's been a tough battle.
That's a signal to all that there'll be no quarter.
Okay. Yeah.
So Eric, Casey is continuing his hard work as we had 4 Living Greyhawk triads on Wednesday night.
oh yeah, I heard about that. That would have been. I gotta go listen to that. That's
Yeah, they
2 from Geoff and 2 from Keeland, and
Was it Sam
also.
White in the Keeland.
Excuse me.
Wasn't Sam in the Keeland?
Sam Weiss, yeah, they talked about. We didn't get him to
You didn't get him,
the show,
okay.
but we tried to get him. We tried to have like 1 a month. or
We
something.
had Sean Merwin and Judy Rudolph on, and then Eric Mensch and Jose Ortiz.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a real good one there. So, see, I forgot what button I'm gonna press next. There we go.
We'll see. You always press at least one wrong button. So.
Always, every freaking time, and you would think after over 2 years of doing this, I would.
Also, you need more Stratagem dice because they're like.
Yes, I
humble
need more
dice.
Titan dice. You about 2 sets.
Yeah.
Casey won one of the sets on Thursday night's game too. So yeah, Casey and DM 221232 won each one a set on Thursday night's show. Or Thursday night's D&D game. Should run that one twice. We're gonna come on a minute or 2 early. Hey, what's up, Carlos Lacing? What's going on, man?
Yes.
Gonna have the whole Greyhawk community here tonight, Eric.
Well, it'll be fun to reconnect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
The guys were wondering if we could get Fred whining here. I said, I don't think so.
Hey, full on
Malden tried to find him, Dennis, and he says he found his girlfriend who then refused on his behalf.
Well, yeah, it's interesting how people fade in and out of this sort of internet life sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Eric, have you heard about our attempts for setting up a Greyhawk Con?
I heard a little bit about it in that last chat last Wednesday. Or, I don't know, it was last Wednesday or 2 Wednesdays ago, but yeah, I saw a little hint of it. Tell me more about it, Eric.
Tabletop. It's on Tabletop Events. We already have 22 events set. Alan Growe's going to put 3 more in. We have 12 Twitch channels involved, and I have a completely filled schedule of highlighted streams over 3 days that we're going to run, and including all the other sign-up events. So it's coming together pretty well.
That's awesome.
No, thank you very much. But I have something.
Greyhawk Con.
What's that?
The idea of a Greyhawk Con, a virtual con even, but like.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Be
the
lucky
only
to even
con-
get an hour on the Gen Con seminar schedule back in the day.
Yeah.
Well, we are working to. I know Wiley, you got your Session Zero for your game, so we'll see you soon. We're working toward 150 events for the first year, and I even sent to WotC a permission to use the word Greyhawk, and then they said de-escalated it and never sent anything back. So screw them. I did my due diligence.
So it's a fan event.
It's fan content.
According to them, so as long as we don't make any money on it, it's completely fan event. So we want to make sure that we play by the rules. So yeah.
All right, so guess what? I'll come on early because we're hard to heat over the music and the ads and stuff. We're BSing here, and maybe you guys should hear this. No problem. Welcome, Eric. Thank you so very much for coming on. Thank you, Anna and Gary, for coming on to join in this discussion as well. And thank you, audience, for coming into this as well. Looking forward to really having a really large crowd. We got more people coming on. So we're gonna. Gary found some pics there, Eric, for me to use. So
yeah, we found one of my very favorites, the one with me and Greg Vaughn and Gary from Gen Con.
Excellent. It's I think we have one other one too, in the scroller coming. All right, so we normally come on 1 minute early. We're gonna come on 3 minutes early. How's that sound? As the numbers are building up here. Alrighty. We'll get this thing started off a little early. Good evening. How's everyone doing? I'm JK Lord Gazumba. What a night tonight! I'm so excited. We have someone who Anna and I have been chasing around for like a year.
Yep.
It's been awesome now.
Yep.
And yes, exactly. And
we have a legend of
a legend.
Greyhawk.
We got 3 legends on, and we may have Leonard may pop on too just to say hello. If he does,
the
just
most legendary of all.
Yes, just welcome him, and looking forward to it. But Eric Mona, thank you so very much for coming on tonight.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here finally.
Yes.
We've been trying to make it work, and here we finally are. And I had such a great time popping in on the chat a couple of weeks ago, and here we are. So I'm happy to be on camera this time.
Yeah.
Yes, and we have a waving flag of the great Pluffett Smedger there, Gary Julian. Gary, welcome back. This is like 3 shows for you. You okay?
Yeah, I'm overexposed now.
Yes, the 100th show.
Awesome. Thank you.
Gary and Casey hopped on at like 9:30, and we went till 12:30, and Anna stayed on the whole time for my 100th show last week.
Oh yeah, I stayed on for like 5.5 hours. Yeah.
Congratulations on 100
Thank
shows.
you. 112. Yeah, it's been. We started in 2018, and we're going strong here.
Yeah.
And so things are just getting better, and I'm really excited about this discussion tonight. We always have Anna Meyer on to contribute to the conversation.
I live here, so,
Yes, you live on both shows that we have. Normally, this show is a little more about my campaign, but when a special event happens like this, hey, this is a perfect time for it. So, Eric, there's probably people in the audience who don't know your full history regarding Greyhawk and where you started. So, why don't you go over a little bit about that for us, if you don't mind?
Well, sure. So I guess starting at the beginning, I got into Greyhawk when I wanted to know more about the official world behind AD&D, and that was the only answer. This is before, Dragonlance. There was obviously the sort of the D&D side of things with that whole campaign, but then there were all these proper nouns that were in the advanced D&D rule books, and I wanted to know more about them. I've always been interested in where ideas come from and the beginnings of things, and so as part of my early interest in AD&D, I wanted to kind of figure out what the there is behind everything, and that seemed to be all about Greyhawk. And so I got the box set in the '83 box set, probably about the time that it came out, And Greyhawk was just always my campaign world. And eventually, when Dragonlance came out and had beautiful Larry Elmore paintings and a whole lot of excitement behind it, kind of at the same time that Greyhawk, at least from a publication perspective, was getting into some challenging territory in terms of quality, I didn't so much switch allegiances as kind of just go where the products went. And so I was playing with Dragonlance for a while, enjoying it. But over time, what I always found was that, like, I'd be bringing in demons and devils, and I'd be bringing in aspects of essentially Greyhawk into my Dragonlance campaign. So I was sort of playing Greyhawk all along the way. And then around that time, I went to college, graduated high school in 1993, went to college, and about that time, through Dragon Magazine, started learning about this unreleased Greyhawk supplement called Ivid the Undying, and what was that all about? But you had to go on to AOL to find out.
Yeah.
So I popped onto AOL, downloaded that thing probably before I did anything else, and then looked around and saw, whoa, there's these chat forums for each of these campaigns, and lo and behold, Greyhawk, by a considerable margin, was the most popular, most vibrant of those communities. And so I plugged into that real quickly. I'd already been a member of the Grey Talk community that Gary launched, which was sort of a college-based sort of bunch of nerds. A very different time. We can get into that if we want. But really was a fan. And through my fandom, got more and more involved with things like the RPGA network, and wrote some scenarios. And to make a very long story short, launched the Earth, or didn't launch the Earth Journal, but took over the Earth Journal on, like, I think issue number 2, and became very very involved with the AOL community that was growing at the time for Greyhawk. That at the same time was writing scenarios and getting more involved in the RPGA network and playing in campaigns all around the country. I was at a retreat there in 98, 99, somewhere around the launch of 3rd edition, right before the launch of 3rd edition, and kind of let those people know that my goal in life was to be the editor of Dragon Magazine. From the first minute I pulled a copy of that out of a comic book long box that my dad bought at a garage sale, when I was a little kid. I'm like, this is a job, and so I wanted to do that. And one sort of career path that I traced was through Polyhedron. A couple of Wolfgang Bauer had gone from Polyhedron to Dungeon to Dragon. Dave Gross had gone from Polyhedron to Dungeon to Dragon. And I was a big fan of Polyhedron as well. And so I let them know that if there was ever an opening on the RPGA staff, I'd be quite interested in joining. And around that time, they were hiring. Jeff Quick, my predecessor as editor of Polyhedron, was moving on to a job in the RPG R&D department of Wizards of the Coast. So they hired me. Lisa Stevens, in fact, who now owns Paizo, hired me to become the global publications coordinator, which meant I was editing Polyhedron. It also meant I was launching a new magazine, which is a Living Greyhawk Journal #1. And already I was involved at that time with getting Living Greyhawk set up, which was going to be a big follow-up to the RPGA's Living City campaign, and but set in Greyhawk. And so I came in as a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, I think 24-year-old kid or something, to help kind of run Greyhawk. Got it into Wizards, and soon realized that what one side of the company thought was the strategy, the other side wasn't so keen on. And so that led to a really interesting situation where we were doing a huge organized play campaign that was bringing in, I think, 15, 20,000 players at that point, which was huge at the time. And yet, nobody at the company really was that interested in doing anything significant with Greyhawk, which was a little bit frustrating. Eventually, I got transferred out of the RPGA department into periodicals, and Polyhedron became a section of Dungeon Magazine. And then around that time, Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast, and they spun all of the publications department off into Paizo Publishing. We did Dragon and Dungeon magazines for about 5 years under license with Wizards. I was the editor-in-chief of Dungeon for much of that time, and then Dragon for about half of that time as well. And there went the relatively freehand that we had editorially. I just decided to bypass essentially anything but the most rote approvals and just take the idea that Greyhawk was the official setting for 3rd edition D&D seriously, because unlike everybody else who looked at that and said, well, that's a lot of work, I looked at that and said, well, that's what I've been focusing on for the last 10, 15 years anyway, and I've got reams of material on it, and I know all the players, and we can really make this thing work. And so did that in Dragon and Dungeon, did the Shackled City adventure path, did the Age of Worms adventure path, did the Savage Tide adventure path, and then Wizards launched 4th edition and decided that 2 subscription services were one too many, and decided not to have the magazines anymore, and instead roll that into their D&D Insider. Basically cut us loose, did not renew our license, and we said, well, we could shutter a company that at that point was employing 26 people, or we could just try and find some way to carry on. So we did, with the Pathfinder Adventure Path, supporting 3.5 D&D for a couple of years. And then once 4th edition actually finally came out, which we hadn't seen before it came out, people didn't really like it, both on my staff and in the audience, and then B, we knew that we were going to have a living game that we were publishing supplements for, and since the licensing regime for 4th edition D&D was both totally lopsided and unfair to the other publishers, but also held in tightest confidence and secret, so that we couldn't make plans to have stuff come out, without messing up our publishing schedule, we decided to do what our audience told us to do, which is to just set off on our own. And so we launched the Pathfinder role-playing game, which was an extension of 3.5 D&D. And from there, I was already publisher.
The rest is history, so to speak.
Yeah, and then the rest is history. That's where I've been for the last 18 years, is publishing Pathfinder. And here I am today.
Well,
that's a long story, but that's pretty much the whole deal.
It's an awesome story.
Wonderful
Erik,
story.
Probably for the first time, meet Leonard Lakoff.
Yeah, I see we have a new guest, and he's the most famous of us all. That's amazing.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that.
The most honored of us all.
Modesty
One of the best
prevents
bona
me.
fides. How you doing, Len?
Mediocre. I'm under chemotherapy, so I have ups and downs.
Okay, well.
Len's a real trooper. He usually comes on for about 25 to 30 minutes on every Wednesday show. In fact, the Wednesday show you hopped on, he had just logged off. And,
I heard that.
Yeah, and then Leonard was on my last week for the 100 show. So this is look at the 4 people I have on tonight, audience. This is amazing. Think about this. I mean, this is just like I'm blown away and humbled that you all are on tonight.
Where did you find Puffett Smegler?
That's Gary Julian.
Yep.
That's Gary. And Gary and Erik.
Because theoretically, he's the one who wrote the glossography and everything.
Right.
Yep.
Yes, and also this book which has both your names on it, Gary Julian and Erik Moen, the first 2. Right, so the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer here. Leonard, do you have a question for? Because we don't know how long we'll have you on. Do you have any questions for Erik at all? Erik is running Paizo now and has a lot of great things going on in that era, and I have a ton of them. But I'm going to open it up to you since we don't know.
Those of us who were there when Gygax was there. When Gygax got lost, the rest of us were persona non grata, especially if we were the ones who were emissaries of the message. We got lost in the shuffle, and after Wizards of the Coast, and then after this and Hasbro and all of that other meshuggah, no one invited us, and I mean myself and a few others, back to the fold. We probably would have been willing, but we would have been wanting to do edition 1 because we're stuck in that mud hole. But that's the way that went down. I think I talked to Gary's wife at one point, who said that. The judge was very unhappy with what the Blooms did, but he said that the law was the law, and it said that Gary either had to buy their shares out or he was shit out of luck. Something akin to that.
Yep.
So I think the question Len would ask is, when did that bullet happen to you as well, Erik, when you were like, you know what, it's time for me to make the move?
It's interesting. I'm not exactly sure. And I'm not exactly sure, and I think Len could probably attest to this from his time, but it's never quite, at least in my experience, it's never quite that overt. You never know that you've been hit by a bullet. It's just kind of one day you stop getting asked to do stuff.
I used to have a subscription to the Dragon magazine through $9.99. that went away the instant Gary went away.
Well, there you go. They cut your benefits.
Yes.
That's a tangible sign that you're on the
Now,
outside.
they couldn't get to my umbilicals, but they.
I think that for me, it was more of an issue of what we were doing with Paizo and what we were doing with Pathfinder. Kind of, even though we're at the time, many of us were still friends and things, there was almost an oppositional force there. I will say, at least a significant portion, some of that is just on me. I felt really.
Is
I think,
Pathfinder based on 3 or is it?
yeah, it was like it spun off at 3.5. We just released our second edition last August, which is an even further departure in which Pathfinder is kind of becoming more of its own thing. But it's very much, in that spirit of 3.5. A lot of people called it 3.75 at the time. And I felt kind of personally betrayed, honestly, at the time. I think that again, I was relatively young. I think that my framing was like, not only are they making corporate decisions that are screwing me potentially out of a job, and I felt like I was doing a pretty good job with Dragon and Dungeon, mostly because that's what people were telling me at the time, but also I just to this day, I still think they never should have canceled those magazines. They could have done what they wanted to do with their online thing, which, by the way, no longer exists and isn't even a deal anymore. They're now in their third iteration of it. And so it just seemed to me as something that I had treasured my whole life. And this is part of growing up, but Dragon was there from when I was a little kid to the day that it stopped, and it felt a little lousy to be the one holding the steering wheel when it stopped. And so I just slowly kind of drifted apart from some of those folks, and I just we had the opportunity, and I really appreciated the opportunity to work with a couple of folks we really liked on the Expedition to the Ruins of Greyhawk project. That's this guy right here. And so
awesome.
Lots of questions coming from me.
So it was interesting because they reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested in writing this book? And I said, well, I'd be interested in it, but honestly, I think you should ask Gary Gygax to do it. It's his dungeon. I actually don't want to have much to do with it unless I know that please talk to Gary. And there was some reason, I know one of the reasons why I was never able to get Gary to write anything meaningful for me during the magazine era when I was at Wizards before Paizo, was that Gary at the time quite reasonably wanted to have royalties based into all of his contracts for creative stuff that he did, but that was just not how the game side of Wizards worked. So they were kind of at an impasse, and so that wasn't going to be able to work. So I said, okay, I'll do it, but I'll do it if I can write a sidebar that basically says this is a bullshit version of the dungeon. It's really Gary's dungeon. Not only is this a bullshit version of the dungeon, this is this third bullshit version of the dungeon. If you count Greyhawk Ruins.
I'm looking for that in his quote here.
So
there's a sidebar in there somewhere. What's that?
What common year did you write your material in?
I think it was 591 or something like that. It was significantly further than Gary.
So it was pre-Living Greyhawk. This is pre-Living Greyhawk then, right?
No, I mean, I don't know. I'd have to dig back into it. I'm pretty sure that if I had anything
it's
to
kind
do
of
with that,
within the time frame of
yeah, I thought it was 597.
But it's
okay, well there you go. So what it was is this is
Yeah.
something that I actually carried over into Pathfinder. Is when we started Living Greyhawk, I think it was in 2001. So I think we had sort of said that was 591, and then every year it goes forward.
Okay, cool.
And so I would have probably tried to stick with that convention with this book.
But
so anyway, and then I pulled in Jason Bowman and James Jacobs because I can't do a book this thick by myself, and I treated it at the time like this is the last opportunity I'm ever going to have to do something for Greyhawk. Partly because I needed to start focusing my creative efforts on Pathfinder and the new world we were building there. Partly because the relationships were not what they once were, just because of, I think they just, somebody, and I know who, but it doesn't matter, somebody got the idea that like Paizo was competition for D&D. And so if, for example, a hardcover book didn't sell well, it might be because the D&D customer only has $50 a month to spend on books, and if they're going to spend it on a Paizo Shackled City book, then why would they spend? Then why are we empowering people to compete with us with our own brand? I honestly think that was a big part of it, and I get it. I think it's tremendously short-sighted, but I get it. And what really started happening, where we started knowing that there was a problem, is we had done the Shackle City book. It was very popular, the hardcover compilation.
Yeah.
We had done a Dragon Compendium hardcover compilation of updated articles going way back, updated to the new edition. That went very well. And we kind of said, okay, we want to pitch Dragon Compendium Volume 2 and an Age of Worms hardcover. And Wizards just kept dragging their heels. And it became pretty clear to me that the fundamental problem, probably other than them just wanting to wait out our contract to put a knife in our back so they could do their online thing, was that somebody, perhaps a couple somebodies, thought, why would we let an Age of Worms hardcover compete with our latest adventure? Let's just drown these people and get rid of them forever.
Eric,
And it didn't really work out that way, as it turns out.
Did you actually play in Gary's game when he ran it in Lake Geneva?
No, I didn't. No, I met Gary at a few conventions and had very cordial conversations with him, and have tremendous respect for Gary.
Well, I didn't play in it either. I mean, I lived in Chicago, so
yeah,
I didn't have a way of commuting.
No, but I
to
had
Geneva.
one opportunity to play a game of Legendary Adventures with Gary at a con, and I was double booked and I couldn't do it. And I just thought, oh, well, you know, I'm in Milwaukee all the time. I'm sure there'll be another opportunity, but of course, there never is another opportunity. You got to take those opportunities as they come.
Yeah.
So getting back to not having a Dungeon or Dragon anymore, I'm going to do a shout out for Christoph. We have hard copy Earth Journals now, right? With some great for Greyhawk, great contributors like Gary Julian, like David Leonard, like William Henry Dvorak, like myself. We're all in here. I
was say you have to mention yourself. You have stuff in there too. Yeah.
So we got some good Greyhawk stuff coming out every quarter, and Christoph's doing a great job running it. So just wanted to do that.
You put one of those in my hands at PAX Unplugged last year, and it was like.
It was probably this edition.
First time I'd seen
it was that one.
This is the Gary Con edition. Yeah.
That wasn't printed in Courier or something.
Yeah.
So it was an experiment we did for GaryCon last year, and we thought it would be a cool idea, so we put it together, and that kind of went away like hotcakes.
I mean, so
disappeared
cool.
immediately, and then Christoph came up with the idea that I'm starting a Patreon just to so I can basically continue to give away the PDFs, and if you donate some money, he will send you a printed copy. So yeah, it's really cool.
Spectacular that's still going on. I mean, that was a labor of love back in the day, and it was so funny because it was so all encompassing. I mean, those of us, Steve Wilson, who was my predecessor on it, and Tom as well, Blue Sponge. A bunch of us worked on it a lot, and now I look and what we came up with, we were so proud of and everything. But it just looks like it's like the text of an email. And now you go and you look at it, and it's beautiful, and it's got maps and full color illustrations. Oh my God.
Yeah, but it's a technology, meaning today it's cheaper, and everyone has a publishing technology possibility in a PC and all that you need to do it. So
very impressive.
So it's kind of cool. But it's cool. You have the same thing with the Wayfinder and other stuff on the Pathfinder side.
Tim Nightingale's Wayfinder for Pathfinder. It's like the era of the fanzine. Is like even stronger now, I think, than it was back in the day. So that's super cool to see.
Yeah.
So a couple questions from the audience real quick. Do you have a favorite old school module?
Oh boy. Yeah. I mean, I think my favorite old school module is the Village of Hamlet.
Cool.
That was literally the first module I ever became aware of. It was, I think, the first thing in D&D I ever became aware of. I was probably in like second grade. I was at my cousin's house, went upstairs to their kitchen, and he's like 5 years older than me, and he and his high school friends were like playing this game with their imagination and monsters and all this, and I'm like, what is that? And I had idolized him anyway, and that green cover with the ghouls hiding behind the pillars and stuff, like that just lit my imagination on fire, and it's what got me, to want to pursue. I would have probably been like a Venus flytrap gotten by D&D somehow anyway, because it's so parallel to so many of my interests. But emulating my older cousin was the first interest that I had. And so I've always had a soft spot for that adventure. I've run it probably 15 times in 4 or 5 different, game systems. One of my happiest moments early on at Wizards, one of the first times when I really felt like I belonged and I was part of the team as opposed to just some kind of booger on the bottom of their shoe in the RPGA department was I was able to play test the Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil adventure that Monty Cook put together, and that was amazing. So I'm not, I must say, as big of a fan of the last sort of 3/4 of Temple of Elemental Evil. It's cool, but it's got the same kind of issues that I have with a lot of mega dungeons.
Nodes and
It
stuff.
goes on forever. The nodes, I think, are really an underwhelming way to end that
It
adventure.
is.
Yeah.
It is.
And so there's a lot of really interesting, really brilliant little encounters and stuff in there, but the whole is not greater than the sum of its parts. And the best part is Village of Hamlet and the Moat House dungeon, because it's got that. And this it was inspirational for me, especially if you look at like the Whispering Cairn, the first adventure that I did for Age of Worms, which I actually wrote. Was I like those adventures that have a town and a dungeon, because they hint at a bigger world. There's back and forth. You don't just go to the front door of the dungeon and mow through until you get to the end. You might hit barriers. You might have to go get some resource you don't have out of the dungeon or whatever. And then there's a map, and there's just this whole like nexus of like characters and adventure hooks and all that. And every time I've run Village of Hamlet, you know, one time I ran it with some of my old RPGA roadshow buddies, and they were like, let's knock over the jeweler, you know, and they robbed the jeweler, and then I had the druid and her big bear come and kill him. It was great. But, you know, sometimes you can do anything with those adventures. You know, I think that's part of what I love about the old AD&D adventures in general. If you want to get super plotty, then I would say play the Assassin's Knot with our company here. You know?
L2.
And that one's great. It's got the timeline, and that also I really like. But, you know, for a lot of those AD&D adventures, they're like, here's a great concept, here's a great setting, here's a killer map, here, it's yours, do what you want. And I that's the kind of spirit that I've always taken from those old adventures.
I want to compliment you on a couple things when you with that discussion, if you don't mind. So
Yes.
I've used Diamond Lake since the like late 80s, early 90s, when the great Free City Grout box set came out, and there's only a little bit about it. And so we've always had locations, and then when you came out with this Diamond Lake, I was like, oh my gosh, I got a map now for this. It was perfect. And I loved all the subplots, and I could write some of those things into my own campaign as well. And what I also liked is you took characters from this, like Kellic, and you put him in Expeditions to the Ruins of Greyhawk as well.
Yeah.
So you had a little bit of a connection between both of them. So this setting is like the Hardby setting of Living Greyhawk or the Free City Grout box set. It's a locale, exactly like Hamlet, like even Keep on the Borderlands, that you can place and build a campaign around. And you have those shops, you have those locations, and you have those personalities in there. And that's exactly, I agree 100%. I mean, it's a little bit of a trap that I'm actually stuck in right now, because, you know, fast forward now to 2020, I'm now working on a book for Pathfinder that's about the city of Absalom, which is kind of like our Greyhawk or Waterdeep. It's our main big city. And the team that put it together, I was one of, you know, a dozen writers on it. Did a very, very good job. But as I was doing kind of my final publisher pass on it, I'm like, you know, it's just missing something. And what it was missing was a really robust list of NPCs and plot hooks and interrelationships and things. We have that with a document you could download called Age of Worms Overload that has all the stat blocks for all the town or whatever. Because it's like, you know, you can just sort of say, here's the map and do all the work yourself. And part of that's the joy of being a DM. But like, I wanted to like really flesh it out. The problem when you say that for a town with 400,000 residents is I'm at 98,000 words right now just on that extra section I'm tacking on. So I'm actually like adding a whole nother book to this book that was supposed to be done by now. So it's like everything doesn't always work up here, you know, most intelligently. It just works for like what I think is going to be the best game experience.
Yeah, but it's a city that size, even a city half that size, so it's more than an elephant. You need to have many small bites before you can tackle it.
Right, and
it's hard to how do you start, so to speak, because you can't have the full picture, and then which gaps do you fill in first without? Yeah, it's
the harder part for me is like, where do you finish? You know, because you can do it, and like what we tried to do is like, oh well, everybody you know who does this. You say you're writing a neighborhood, give us like 5 NPCs. Well, okay, so you're going to get like the leader, the head of the town guard, the most important merchant, but you're not getting any lower class people. You're not getting any crooks. You're not, so it's like you start looking, well, hey, we've got 150 NPCs and none of them are gnomes. What's a gnome character going to want in this city? And so it's dangerous. I'm not saying I make all the right decisions.
But you should never see it as finished, because there can always be a cooler product coming out in 2 years or 3 years.
You should have just given that project to Len, because he's great on that level of detail on towns.
Oh yeah, he does an Excel town every month.
Since we've got Len here, I mean, one thing that just going way back to the beginning of this, which is like, how did I get involved in Greyhawk and talking about those old AOL days, Len was a part of that. And I don't remember exactly how or when, but Len and I started sort of chatting and trading emails back and forth, and just the accessibility of these people who I, at the time, kind of were like, oh my God, these guys are legends. To be able to reach out to Len and ask him a question about the Lendor Isles or about his Sewell deity articles and have him shooting back great answers and stuff was like, that was a revelation, that direct immediacy, not just the content, not just the contact with other fans like Gary or Steve or people like that, but also contact with, Len and with Frank Menser. And then ultimately, although it took quite some time, with Gary himself, was just an amazing experience. And that strengthened, I think, the community, at least for me. So Len, I just wanted to thank you for answering the AOL Instant Messenger notes of a little schnug like me. So thanks, Len. Appreciate it.
Well, anytime you put more than 1,000 people in a town, if you really want to do it justice and give everybody stats, you're going to be there a long time.
Too long. Too long. I'm not doing stats this time. I'm doing name, level, a couple of plot hooks, physical description, and how they relate with other characters. I'll let people do their own stat blocks.
So Len, Erik, is very active in our shows, and in fact, he's given away a Leoman satchel. It actually has Leoman on it. I mean, that's a piece of history, and Amy Crittenden Thaler won it with an item. And so on Wednesday's show, we're going to talk about the magic item they both created together, and hopefully people will start using it. I mean, that's how cool it is. Yeah. I mean, that's some awesome stuff. Yeah, definitely to keep it going. So he's rolling right along. Len, do you have anything? I know you probably got to roll out in a little bit. What do you have anything else you'd like to say, or?
Got 28 minutes.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Gary, come on, you've been quiet, man.
Yeah,
Erik is a good talker. He doesn't really need to talk.
A lot anyway.
So maybe I thought I'd cover the early stuff and ask Erik what his impressions were, how the fandom was able to revive Greyhawk the last time. What were sort of some of the key moments or behind the scene moves that got that done? And what does he see maybe is the future for that being possible ever again?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, and Gary, you probably had a similar feeling. I always felt like, okay, so Greyhawk, Gygax, there seemed to be some split with Gygax that pre-internet, you couldn't really understand what happened or why. Post-internet, sometimes it's hard to understand what happened or why. But, I just because TSR was clearly putting not their top talent on, the sort of the puppets, child's play era of adventures. These were clearly just recycled RPGA scenarios that often had nothing to do with Greyhawk. They were almost like slot fillers, where they had to do something, so they just do this. And at the same time, they're doing amazing things with, starting with Dragonlance, but eventually, around the time we're all hopping online, they're doing things like Planescape and Birthright, where all of a sudden there's like meticulous art direction at the same time as higher production values, at the same time as all the stuff you would normally get in a campaign setting. And it's like, well, if they're going to put all this cash into Al-Qadim, then obviously Greyhawk's just not as popular as I thought it was. Maybe its time has passed or whatever. But then we get online, and it's like, no, Greyhawk's very, very popular. And I'd be willing to bet that came as something of a surprise even to the people at TSR. I think that I know how I felt when I looked, and again, like they do these conversations in folders, and like every time there'd be, I don't know, 100 posts or whatever, it'd start a new folder. And Greyhawk was just like outgunning the Forgotten Realms, like even before like the Orth Journal and stuff. And so there was a real effort, and we were meeting every week in Wednesday chats and stuff as the Council of Greyhawk, and we were like, we wanted to take advantage of that. We wanted to show TSR by the interest that we were showing in Greyhawk that it was a setting that was worth reviving, and it was a setting that was worth publishing again. And I bet it was because so many people came onto AOL because of Ivid the Undying. Honestly, I really do think that was a big part of it, is like, wait, a free supplement. And I Use the Evil, it was so good, and the Marklands was so good. And so the idea of a Carl Sargent, a Great Kingdom supplement, are you kidding me? Like, I would crawl through broken glass.
Anna thinks it's the best supplement ever written.
I think it might be one of the best D&D things that's ever been done.
Yeah.
It's just a total shame that, that they just never published it. And so I think we treated it like a contest, and it was like, oh, I mean, I remember sometimes like, oh, there's Forgotten Realms is catching up. Let's go post some more interesting content. And then more people were drawn to it. And I think that a couple of things happened. I think that Roger Moore became interested, which was very interesting, because I think he was a guy whose, stewardship of Dragon Magazine was something most Greyhawk fans at the time, I think, held in quite high regard. And so him being involved struck us not just as like, oh, someone at TSR is interested, but like someone who's been there for a long time and seemed to have a lot of power. That was interesting. And then I think the other thing, of course, that happened that really moved the dial was Wizards of the Coast buying TSR. And so then you get people like Lisa Stevens involved in product decisions, and then they're looking at how do we create a world in addition to just a game, and maybe we can weave some Greyhawk stuff in there. And then my big problem was I took them seriously and was like, okay, great, let's do it. And they're like, no, we're not being honest. So we can get into that a little bit later. But I think that was the thing. I think that it was an undeniable interest of the fans, and ultimately publishing companies exist to service their customers. So if the customers are saying, this is what we want, please do this, then I think it really behooves a good business person and a good publisher to listen to that and to see if there's some there. And so that resulted in that Greyhawk 98 stuff that turned into eventually kind of the Living Greyhawk era, if you will. Again, it was always kind of done on the side. It was never the crown jewel like Forgotten Realms or something like that. But we just refused to let it die. And once they let us in the building, it got a lot harder to stop us. And then they kicked our asses out of the building, and then they stopped it right good. But even then, they keep coming back to it. They did Saltmarsh and DMG2. There's elements of it. I'm told still in 5e and stuff. So
they even did.
So I think to hit the second part of Gary, your question is how do you rekindle it? I think you're seeing that right now. I think that what's happening with the Orth Journal is a big part of it. I think that I'm not an expert at this, but I think that DM's Guild program, the self-publishing type stuff through them, I understand that there's some restrictions on some of their older content as for now. But if they uncork that at any time, I think Greyhawk will be back bigger than it's ever been.
Cool.
Which do you think is a stronger factor? Having an internal champion, like maybe back then Lisa Stevens, or having fan enthusiasm, be at a fever pitch?
That I would have answered that question differently 15 years ago than I'm going to answer it now. I think the fan enthusiasm is more important, because the in-house champion can get fired or get bored and leave. And if you only have one person, even if there's somebody like me, in charge of the magazines, who's going to make sure that there's Greyhawk content in almost every issue, and it's going to be like, oh, Greyhawk's the core pantheon, huh? All right, how about a column every month? I'll give you your Greyhawk pantheon. You lose that person, and then you're going to lose that impetus. But if the audience strays away, then there's nothing, and even the strongest advocate's not going to be able to push something through that other people at the company don't believe that there's an audience for. So I think that it's interesting, now we launched Living Greyhawk almost 20 years ago. And so if you start thinking about, the what was happening 20 years before we launched Living Greyhawk? Well, they were putting out the folio. So Greyhawk was born 20 years ago. So those of us who had been, engaged in that through our teens and our childhood and stuff are now in positions around the year 2000 to start making a difference. Well, now you start thinking about, well, who are the people who came in, maybe even through Living Greyhawk, which was pulling tens of thousands of players in and exposing the world for the first time to a new generation, as well as kind of servicing some of the older folks. Those people are potentially now the folks who are going to be making decisions going forward. So there's this weird sort of creeping nostalgia thing that's a little bit of a moving target, but I think that Greyhawk is particularly ripe for it. I think there's maybe two other things that are in its favor right now. One of them is, it will always be in its favor, is it's the original. It's the thing that was the underlying part of Gary's campaign. It always will be. I mean, Blackmore has the same sort of pedigree on the Arneson side, and so you can't take that away. It will always be at the root of Dungeons and Dragons, no matter how much you dress it up, no matter how much you mess it up. People will always be curious about where it started, and that's always going to be in Greyhawk's favor. The other part that I think is in its favor, honestly, to some degree now, is with time moving on, and like back when we were doing our thing, it was like, well, but this doesn't really match Gary's original campaign and all that. I think the more time that goes by, that whole idea, I mean, it's funny to hear me say it, but the whole idea of canon and like what's official and what's real, it just becomes in some ways a little bit less important. And so the idea of setting a campaign in the year 620 or whatever is not maybe as radical today as it would have been back in the day. And so I think the orthodoxy part of it isn't maybe as important to people, and that probably helps as well, because I think part of what the publishers got to be concerned with, and what I think was an overwhelming concern at Wizards when I worked there, was just like, is continuity of value, or is it just a time sink? If I've got to employ somebody full time to vet every single manuscript to make sure that every single god is referred to in exactly the same way and is correct with 40 years of publishing history, do I really need to do that, or can we just pull stuff out of our ass with some new thing that we make up, and then there's not that trap? I have very strong feelings about that, but those feelings are the feelings of an artist and not necessarily the feelings of a business person. And so, for good or ill, because I'm both now. But anyway.
So Gary, I think Erik just gave us our marching orders to get the fan content, keep on kicking it up.
Yeah, that's virtual Greyhawk have to take off.
That's it. I'm trying. We're all trying. We got a team.
But it's also a much bigger pond nowadays than it used to be, meaning the pond has grown enormously the past 10, 15 years. So now it's a much bigger pond, which means that there are more ducks can be there in the pond before it gets crowded, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
all right, here's two questions. I want to get these in concerning. One's concerning Age of Worms. It goes way back. It was originally supposed to be 20 modules, adventures, and it went to 12. And what was the concept for the other 8? And then good. Yeah,
that's a good question.
Okay.
And somebody asked me that question online a few months ago, and I actually had kind of forgotten, and so I went back and looked at the original thing that we proposed, and there were a couple of significant differences, but honestly, for the most part, it was breaking things up into shorter chunks. So much of the storyline was still the same. It would just be like, instead of this one adventure being 40 pages long and having 2 chapters, it would just be the first 20-page chapter. And so a lot of it was less about cutting content and more about sort of smooshing ideas together to make the individual adventures more impactful and bigger, which I think ultimately was a smart decision. I think 20 months is too long to hold anybody's attention for anything. Arguably 12 months is too long. And so now, even with Pathfinder, where we're still kind of doing the adventure path format, we're doing 6 volumes, and they're a little longer even than the Age of Worms adventures were, but 6 months is a long time to hold anybody's interest in one particular idea. So in retrospect, I'm actually very glad that they didn't let me do a 20 adventure path. There's basically 2 notes that they gave back on and Wizards. Our relationship with Wizards up until the very, very end was always really, really strong. I mean, for the first few years, it was just like we were still working there, but just in a different building. And so the approvals process was always very, very smooth. A lot of the people that we were dealing with on the approval side had previously worked on the magazine, so there's a real feeling of camaraderie. So we didn't get a lot of pushback or changes. I think the only thing they ever asked us to change was a punchline in a 3-panel cartoon once that could be construed as off-color joke or something. But on the Age of Worms thing, I think they rightly said 20's too much. But they also then kind of said, yeah, this almost feels more like a Greyhawk adventure than like a D&D adventure. And so we really prefer that you not set it in the city of Greyhawk, and we really prefer that you not use tensor and stuff like that. And so I was like, yeah, okay, we can make that happen. So it's the Free City, and I think it's called Manzorian.
Yeah,
but some of those, that's why that stuff changed is basically
to make it more neutral setting.
Yeah, and to not scare people away, not make people think they needed to read 40 years of Greyhawk history to understand how to play even the first volume in the Adventure Path. But ultimately, I was just kind of like, the people who this is really written for are going to know anyway, and so they can pretty easily swap out. I think ultimately it's probably about 5 names. But then once you got into the stuff like the Prince of Red Hand and all that, it was just use the names.
Yeah. So what was the process? Why did you choose the stories you did, and what was the process behind there? Meaning there are many places you could go and a lot of things you could have done. So what was the was that kind of
are you talking about for Age of Worms or for
or for Savage Tide and Shackled City?
Well, okay, so let's start with Shackled City. I inherited Shackled City from my predecessor, Chris Thomason, who now goes by Chris Youngs. And he I think even Chris Perkins was starting to simmer the idea of an adventure path back in the day. There was a series of Adventures in Dungeon by Eric Boyd called The Mirror of Dead Men that was always kind of like this prototype of a adventure path. And then as part of the 3rd edition D&D rollout strategy, the whole adventures that started with Bruce Cordell's The Sunless Citadel and Forge of Fury, I think. Anyway, that whole storyline was called in-house was called the Adventure Path, but they also came with very strict instructions that we were never to use that phrase out of house, because again, I think there was this fear that if it looks like it's a bigger chunk than it needs to be, people will not buy it. So the links between all those adventures were very subtle, and it was almost like, yeah, we're going to tie them together because it would be convenient for people's play cycle to have an adventure that's in the next level range, but let's not get too crazy with the connections. And I was like, off to the side, 25 years old, thought I knew everything, was just like, that's dumb, I wouldn't do it that way. And then finally, I had the chance to really do something that was a lot more interconnected. So the idea was Shackled City. You asked me a question and you're going to get like a 30-minute answer.
That's okay.
The idea of the Shackled City was, let's do for real a adventure path. But let's do it kind of, there's a writing exercise called an exquisite corpse, where you write 2 lines of a poem and then you fold over the first line and then you hand it to the next person in the writing group. And then they read that second line, but they don't know the context, and they write their own 2 lines. You keep folding it. And ultimately you get this poem, which you're kind of writing subconsciously, and sometimes it works, but 95% of the time it's just a bunch of garbage. So that was kind of the approach to that Shackled City adventure path, was let's have a couple of broad ideas, we'll write it, and then we'll kind of hand it off to the next writer, almost like a round robin novel. And then they'll write the next installment, and then we'll hand it off to the next writer, and they'll write the next installment. And I think I picked it up with, I can't remember anymore, the 3rd or 4th installment, the one where he's fighting the Glabrezu on the cover was my first one. And I got a hold of it, and there were 2 things that I noticed about the way that Dungeon had sort of been run, I think sort of traditionally, it was like, okay, let's spend a week in the slush pile, which is like all the submissions, and then let's put 3 adventures in the magazine, and then let's edit that magazine, and then when we're done with that, we sent it to the printer, then we spend our next week picking more adventures. And it wasn't quite exactly like that, but there was never much of a sense of what was coming 2 or 3 adventures or 2 or 3 issues ahead. And so I think that was the spirit that this adventure path was. It was like, let's just do it as a fun thing. They appeared like one every 3 or 4 issues.
So the end wasn't written when you started?
No, there was nothing written. So when I inherited Dungeon, I was like, okay, there's no plan. There's nothing. It's just this evolving thing. And we could already tell that there were a couple of plot hooks that should have been followed up on, but that because there wasn't sort of a fundamental outline for the campaign, those threads were getting dropped. There was one in particular with a really mysterious NPC called Celeste that clearly there was something more to her, whatever. By the time that got to near the end of the adventure path, really nothing had happened with that character. And I was working with James Jacobs as my assistant editor once I took over from Chris, and that had always really bugged us. So it was partly that Celeste issue, partly just we didn't know how this thing was going to end. And I said, I've got to change that. I've got to rein this thing in. We have to be planning where we're headed toward, or we're going to fumble this thing. It's just going to be a random collection of adventures. And so we actually had, at the time, most of the writers were people who worked at Wizards or people who were in the Seattle area. So we actually had a conference where all the writers, all the previous writers, all the next upcoming writers, we got them all in a room and we brainstormed, like, well, how's this campaign going to work? And at the time, I was also doing a lot of conventions, and this was very early at Paizo now at this stage, because it kind of transitioned right at the beginning of Shackle City. One thing that I would be doing at these booths was trying to sell subscriptions to the magazines. And so people would constantly, I think it was at Origins, but people all day long would come up to me and be like, oh, I love Dungeon Magazine. I love Shackled City. Oh my God, the adventure path is so great, because individually the adventures were very strong. And I said, oh, awesome. Well, we're running a subscription deal here today. And they go, oh no, I only buy the issues with the adventure path. So I'm like, okay, well, when we do our next adventure path, I'm not going to give you an option to not buy an issue. I'm just going to put one in every single month, and then I got you, because I want to sell subscriptions to this thing. And so, so once we had sort of followed through then with that outline for Shackled City, we knew that for Age of Worms, we wanted to write the whole outline from the very beginning. And I would say that then has become kind of our pattern until the current Pathfinder adventure path is pretty strong, broad strokes plans for major villains, major plot points in the adventure, where the locale is going to be, still leaving all the true details up to the individual writers, but having a sense of how some of those things are going to flow through the whole time was really, really important.
Yeah.
And so then again, just sorry, long story, but you get to the Age of Worms and it's like, okay, so what do I want to do? We'd already kind of decided to lean into the Greyhawk as the core setting for 3rd edition as part of our overall editorial strategy for both magazines, mostly because James and Jason and I and others on the team were interested in that and knew we could do it justice. And Sean Reynolds was also
Wolfgang as well was an art.
Yeah, Wolfgang was one of our freelancers. So a lot of very sort of friendly people to at least that aesthetic, if not necessarily the specifics of the Greyhawk setting. So I knew that. So we'd done Shackled City, which was kind of an urban mystery fight against almost like a supervillain team up kind of a thing. And I wanted to do something that was a little bit more sort of, it was just going to play off another type of campaign. And so I was looking at maybe something based around an artifact. And originally the whole thing was the idea of doing a campaign set around reuniting the Rod of 7 Parts. Menser had done some RPGA scenarios about that a long time ago. They did that Dwarven quest for the Rod of 7. No, that was Menser's. They did a 2nd edition, I think Skip Williams did a Rod of 7 Parts box set, which had some really alluring ideas in it, but I always thought the adventure was pretty pedestrian and not that interesting. And so I knew I wanted to set something where eventually you would go to the Free City at Greyhawk, and that brought me into that sort of Cairn Hills area. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, oh, well, who's buried in the Cairn Hills, and what's that all about, and the Battle of Pesh, and all this other crap that I'd had rattled around in my head from long phone conversations with Gary Holian and, Council of Greyhawk meetings and things like that. And I was like, okay, that's it. Let's make this about the Rod of 7 Parts. Let's make this about the Wind Dukes of Akka, which are from, originally from the DMG, but then fleshed out a little bit more in Skip's adventure. And let's really make this an epic sort of artifact hunt. And that was the impetus for setting the Age of Worms in the Cairn Hills and Diamond Lake, and all that stuff kind of came together once I had those pieces in mind.
It's
cool.
It's an awesome. It's an all-star cast.
15 years.
No, it's great. It's an all-star cast of authors here. I mean, Mike Merles did one. Greg Vaughn. Huge.
Sean did one.
Yeah.
James Jacobs did one. Yeah. So Bowman did one. Yeah. I mean, it was, it was really fun. That was editorially, I think Age of Worms was as fun as I maybe ever had.
It's fantastic.
In a way, Erik, wasn't it great that they actually pushed you away from the core of the setting, from Egg's characters, and from using the city of Greyhawk, because we were able to expand the setting that much more?
Yeah, although honestly, you know, again, I was a bit of a pain in the ass when I was 25, 26 years old. So I didn't like to take no for an answer. So really what I did was mostly just change the names, you know, so we still had as much stuff in the city of Gray. I think what I wasn't able to do as much that I really wanted to do would have been like supplementary articles where we really went deep into like the city. I was able to squeeze some of that stuff into this guy.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get to. Trust me, I'm gonna
also
go
into
crazy
Living
on
Greyhawk
that one.
Journal. There's some City of Greyhawk stuff, so we didn't really need to do it quite as much. But I didn't, you know, I'd always wanted to do stuff with Red Hand. I wanted to do stuff. I wanted to get a little bit more into the Horn Society than we probably did. But,
Oh yes.
Anna loves Horse Society.
yeah, I mean, what's not to love? And the whole idea of like, you know, those articles of like what the happenings in the Flanus articles about the unnameable hierarchy, and you know, it's just so thought provoking.
Yep.
So Len, I know you got to depart soon. You got any questions for Erik?
Yeah. Did you ever try to contact Gary Gabbin?
Oh yeah, I talked to Gary many times. And tried to get one of the first things I tried to do was, you know, again, as a young kid, not understanding what it's like to crash into a wall going 100 miles an hour. I'm like, why don't we have the RPGA publish Castle Greyhawk? So got actually pretty far into some discussions with Gail and Gary about the.
No, I mean after he lost the company.
All of my conversations with Gary were after he left the company, and much more in this sort of post. There was this moment, I think, when Wizards bought D&D where they tried to reach out to Gary, they tried to reach out to Dave, they tried to reach out to Tracy and Laura from on the Dragonlance side where there'd been some alienation there. TSR in its dying days kind of alienated everyone, you know, from 86 to, you know, 95 or whatever. They almost every single one of their stars eventually got alienated one way or the other, probably to do with money. And they eventually kind of tried to make up with those folks. And so when I got there, I had an interesting thing where Peter Ackison and Lisa Stevens, certainly some of the folks who had kind of come on the WotC side, were very much about that reconciliation, very much about trying to find ways to get Gary and Dave back into the fold, so to speak. I think Gary did a brief editorial like pass about the third edition rules and gave them a memo or something. I can't remember exactly how it all worked out. But, you know, on the other hand, there were still people in the creative department who seemed to harbor weird grudges and things I didn't ever really understand. Seemed like jealousy to me in the most part. But also, I've heard enough stories to know that Gary was difficult to work with at times at the height of his power as well. And so some of that was still lingering. But so you had the very top was all about like being cool with Gary and everything. Some of the people in the middle were still a little grudging about it. I was just like in full hero worship mode. So I tried to reach out to all those folks. We were never able to make anything work on the City of Greyhawk side just because, or sorry, the Castle Greyhawk side, just because, again, that royalty issue. I was like probably the lowest power editor at the entire company at the time as the polyhedron guy. So I probably wasn't the guy to make that project work ultimately, to maneuver the levers of Wizards. The people who were in charge of those levers probably weren't particularly interested anyway. The one thing I was able to do with Gary's help is this guy right here, which is Dungeon number 112. This is our 30th anniversary of D&D issue. And so I actually worked with both James Jacobs, but also with Rob Kuntz and Gary on this. So Gary contributed a few ideas to Mari Castle, which was a redo of Morton Canaan's Fantastic Adventure. And Rob wrote an entire new level for that. So, you know, Gary and I corresponded a lot, and he did some minor contributions. We also did his Up on the Soapbox column in Dragon at that time. But I wish I'd had more of an opportunity to do creative collaboration with Gary than I had a chance to.
All right, so let me get caught up on the questions from the audience. Ashur asks, is the Kingdom of Cheliax loosely based on the Neelix House of the Great Kingdom, or is that in your mind? Also, we have a question from Prenzi about the legacy. He or she heard that the Pathfinder AP Legacy of Fire was originally going to be set on Earth and Backlunish lands.
That's very interesting. Let me hit those one at a time.
Okay.
So the Great Kingdom, kind of, and more sort of on the back end than the front end. The origin of some of the stuff from Golarion, which is the world of Pathfinder, comes from a lot of it. Like most of the gods come from James Jacobs' own home campaign that he'd been working on since he was 12. I think James was first published in Dungeon when he was 12 years old. So James is like really one of the I think the superstars of this whole business, and so he created, I created Eridan, the dead human god. I created Iomade, kind of the Mahani kind of goddess in our world, and I think Mike McCarter, who was one of our editors at the time, created Shellen, and I think Jason Bowman created Razmir, who's not really a god, and I think almost all the other gods, at least in that initial offering for Pathfinder, were from James's campaign. James also, with Wes Schneider and James Sutter, were working on Pathfinder Adventure Path, which is set in Varisia, and then Jason and I created kind of the rest of the world with a lot of input from the Paizo staff. And so one of the sources that I was plundering was not so much my home campaigns, because I had been running stuff in Greyhawk all along, but I had a little side project I was working on at the time that I'd hoped to become kind of a miniatures game that was all about a planet trying to colonize this other planet through these interplanetary gates, and so you'd be like racing for territory and sort of kind of on a hopefully not the worst parts of colonization, but exploring a new world and all that. So I created a handful of factions that I thought would be fun, and one of them was a Viking faction that eventually turned into the lands of the Linorm Kings, which in some ways I think is probably influenced by the Frost and Ice and Snow barbarians from Greyhawk.
Oh, sure.
The Galt, because I've always been very interested in the French Revolution, and so the idea of having a country that was tied up in a kind of an eternal revolution I thought was really cool. And then I wanted to have kind of the American Revolution style thing, and that turned into Andoran. And then I had something in this is a funny story actually, something that I'd been working on since college was this kind of evil empire thing that featured into a bunch of sort of short stories and proto novels and things I wrote while I was an undergraduate at Emerson College in Boston, and that was called Chelan, because I'd taken a really disastrous vacation to Lake Chelan, Washington in 1988 with my family, and it was rainy and shitty and there was nothing to do and I hated it. And so that became the name for the evil empire in my stories. But then as I kind of was getting older and older, I realized like that's like a place where people go to pick apples in Washington State and go on vacation. That's not appropriate. So that's where I came up with the idea of Cheliax, which is just a play on Chelan. And then as we started kind of weaving it in, like the idea of that faction in my miniatures game was so I grew up in Minnesota, and there's a painting in the Capitol there of Hennepin, who was like I think he was a preacher or something. Anyway, I have burned in my head this idea of like this Christian minister, like kind of, holding a big cross and on the shores of this lake, and all the natives are like looking at him. He's obviously super racist, but like the idea of that, but like put a pentagram instead of a cross, like this devil worshiping sort of missionary culture was really interesting to me at the time. And so that's where it came. And then once that sort of devil part came in, the Great Kingdom part, definitely crept in, but it was more kind of after the fact. And so the idea, I don't know that it was, there's a couple of parallels, I think, like the Bandit Kingdoms and the River Kingdoms in Pathfinder, fairly similar conceptually. So there's some broad conceptual similarities that I just couldn't help but be almost subconscious, but not so much on the Great Kingdom side as you might think. But also, sure, some element, it was interesting. I one of the things that's cool about working in a shop like Paizo or Wizards is you're working with so many creative people, you're in so many different meetings. Sometimes it's hard to remember exactly like who invented what. And so I'd always sort of thought that like, oh yeah, the fact that we have Hell Knights in our campaign world, that's kind of a similar play to the old Devil Knights or whatever the hell they are in Greyhawk. I can't even remember anymore. Fiend Knights, that were in Ivid the Undying and stuff. And I always thought subconsciously, oh, that must have been an influence. And I even said in some meeting, 15 years after the fact, I'm like, oh yeah, I think that was inspired by the Fiend Knights from Greyhawk. And Wes Schneider, who was very heavily involved in the development of some Cheliax stuff after I kind of set it into the water, I think was more like, no, dude, that was my idea. I was like, oh, okay. And so like, I don't know. It gets hard to say after a while what comes from where. What was the second question though?
Was the Backlunish West?
That's interesting. I don't remember that.
Okay.
It's certainly possible. I'd have to talk to James. That would be a really interesting question for James Jacobs. Is like, did we ever get particularly far into what the fourth Dungeon and Dragon adventure path would have been after Savage Tide. My sense is that we didn't put much thought into that. I knew certainly that Wizards was going to pull the plug on us probably 6 months before even some members of the staff knew, and certainly long before the main audience knew. That was really one of the big concerns, was we had just launched Savage Tide. I think we were on maybe volume 2 of that or something. I mean, it's a long time ago. It's hard to remember exactly. But when, the top people at Paizo found out that Wizards was not going to renew our license. And so I think that the building blocks for Pathfinder were happening at a very similar time. And so the timeline to me doesn't really work out that would have been, that we would have put much thought into that as of having been a Greyhawk. It's possible, but it would have been very proto. It would have been more like the idea of let's do kind of a genie focused thing in Back Luna. That's probably about as far as it ever got, and I don't recall that.
Whose idea was Sassarine?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Sassarine's idea was probably Chris Perkins.
Really?
Well, okay. Yeah, because that's wait, no, let me think. No, I'm getting confused now. So there's Cauldron is Chris Perkins. That's right. From
here. I'm going to go to a map real quick, everyone. Here we go.
Yeah.
Let me hop up on that real quick here before I hit the wrong button. Next one. There we go. Sassarine up north there.
Down in the Medio jungle and
I mean I think that's James Jacobs.
Really?
Okay. So James kind of took. So by the time Age of Worms was wrapping up, I was also editing Dragon because my predecessor on Dragon lasted like 3 issues and then bailed. And then I was like, so I got moved into that, and I was still holding on to kind of both for a while, mostly just to see Age of Worms through to completion. And then James took over really with Savage Tide. I was heavily involved with James in the outlining of Savage Tide and in pulling in the Isle of Dread. That was something that we wanted to do kind of from the beginning. But I'd say that almost certainly it was a James Jacobs joint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
thanks for letting me steal it for Greyhawk.
What's that?
Thanks for letting me steal the Isle of Dread for Greyhawk in 114.
Yeah, exactly. And that was something that I get bent out of shape as a Greyhawk fan sometimes when it's like, they just took Saltmarsh and just jammed it into this new thing, or the Temple of Elemental Evils in the Forgotten Realms now. What the hell? We kind of did that to the Isle of Dread.
Or No World.
It was such a iconic location, and it was so key and tied into what we wanted to do, sort of with the setting of the Savage Tide, that it just was like kind of a no-brainer. And so we there was no plans to do anything with Mystara at the time, and really haven't been to date. So it just seemed like a shame to let that go to waste. And, I know, I don't know, Gary, I'm sure you were the same way, but most of us use that stuff pretty willy-nilly, whether it was set in Greyhawk or not. I mean, I think all of us.
Absolutely, and I figure every world has an Isle of Dread.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was a fun way to kind of appropriate something great from another. It's happened to Greyhawk so many times, it was kind of fun to do it in the other.
Was it a conscious effort to move the setting of the last path to somewhere below the map, sort of keep it off the continent, or was it just coincidence?
I think it was mostly coincidental. I think it was we just we're always like trying to do something different culturally, bringing it to a different part of the world or whatever. But I also think that, the Cauldron's kind of down there somewhere as well.
It's close. Yeah.
Made it down there. And so I think there was a little bit of an element of like, hey, let's carve out this little area as kind of ours. I bet that if Paizo had been allowed to continue with the magazines, we probably would have continued to kind of flesh out that, maybe get into the Sea Princes area a little bit more. I don't know. Who knows what we would have done?
Yeah, but the cool thing was that you opened a new frontier in Greyhawk that wasn't detailed at all before. You kind of, brought all the high quality new kind of cool fully featured content for a new era, a new frontier. It was awesome. Yeah.
I know a lot of people use Sassarine as the jump off point to do Isle of Dread to this day. So all the time, and where it's placed, I know Anna has it on the maps somewhere, but
it was so cool because those are as feature rich as any Card Sergeant Marklands or anything. I mean, they're some of the best quality things ever written for Greyhawk. So it's awesome, and it also adds to the setting that way, that it's not just overwriting or putting stuff, kind of just painting up the old ugly bits. It's kind of adding in new stuff.
Yeah. And I think that You know, I think that Age of Worms is probably a little bit more about filling in some of those blanks, you know, because we were playing right in the center of the bullseye
Yeah.
method of campaign design, if I can get truly Gygaxian for a minute. You know, so that was very much about like, oh, this thing got mentioned in this old Dragon article. Let's take inspiration from that. Let's bring in Dragotha. It was almost kind of like a Greyhawk greatest hits album, you know, whereas again, I think that Shackled City, which was originally never conceived to be set in Greyhawk at all, we retroactively made that happen. And then Sassarine, which that was much freer territory to kind of do our own stuff, and particularly James Jacobs' own stuff. So yeah, so he deserves a lot of credit for that for sure.
Let's go back in time just a little bit.
Sure.
You are not the main author on this, but you are a contributing editor to one of my favorite 2E publications of all time, Bastion of Faith. Okay.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
By Bruce Cordell, who I've tried, I've beaten to death trying to get him on the show, and I have not been successful. Maybe you can help me out with that. But what was your input on this, and if you have any memories?
You know, there was a period where it coincided. It was probably, if I'm thinking about it now, I'd say it was between 96 and 98, probably, where I was, Lisa in particular, as the brand manager for the Greyhawk revival, was using me and I think Steve Wilson primarily as like continuity consultants. So there was a period there where I got everything. I got, I think I'm credited in a lot of that stuff, but I got like all those, you know, Lysandra the Mad Adventure. I got the, you know, the Doom Grinder. I got all those Paul Kidd novels. I got a bunch of stuff. And it'd be fun actually to go through my old files and find all my just obsessively detailed memo. I'm sure the authors just hated getting them. You know,
Erik was quite the canon master back then.
Yeah, I was such an anal asshole.
He always brought the receipt.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just like, it was so exciting to be asked, you know. And so for Bastion of Faith, I think what I was mostly looking at was it had a lot to do with Hieronius and Hextor, if I'm remembering correctly, particularly Hieronius.
Oh, both specialty priests are in here, both of them.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
so it was mostly that. It was mostly just double checking the continuity there.
Okay.
I don't know. Let me see if I still got it on my computer.
I'll say this. It fits perfectly in my Shieldlands campaign. It's wonderful.
Yep.
The detail of the characters in here is wonderful.
Yep.
And
I'm reading it again now.
Yeah,
I'm going to set my next campaign.
I love it.
Yep.
I absolutely love this. The this high level spells, everything, the uniqueness to it is fantastic. So if you don't have it, I know David. Thank you, David Leonard, for reminding me to ask the question on that one on this, because I'm definitely a fan of that.
It will be part of
I think all that stuff's on an older computer.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
I don't really know. I do recall that that one was particularly easy. Bruce Cordell is I think one of the best writers of that era when it comes to interesting question. Interesting Bruce Cordell story.
Okay.
And it's a Greyhawk story as well. The folks in the chat probably recall that around the same time as this thing came out, the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer, we also got this beautiful piece. It's a piece of something. It's a little bit thinner, but it's essentially a distillation of this.
Yeah.
So we were doing this, and then some of the folks in with a lot of power in the department, I think, didn't really realize it was happening. Honestly, my take on it is that Lisa and the RPGA had their plan cooking over here, and all the R&D people who were understandably very busy getting 3rd edition launched were doing their own stuff over there. And I remember distinctly kind of coming in and people are like, oh, hey, who are you? And I'm like, I'm the new RPGA guy and I'm writing the Greyhawk source book. They're like, what Greyhawk source book? You know, so the book, and we could probably do a whole show on this, but the book faced more internal opposition than any project I've ever been involved with. I was called in front of the bosses probably on 2 or 3 different occasions with real challenges, like, why are we doing this? You know, and part of that I think was just left hand, right hand corporate stuff. But part of that I think was that the folks working on 3rd edition, I think that it hurt their egos that they weren't going to be the ones who got to do the first big campaign setting. And you can tell when they did finally do that campaign setting in the form of the Forgotten Realms book, which is just this beautiful, lavishly illustrated, full color, all hands on deck. I mean, that's what they wanted to do. And what we were doing was something more off to the side and whatever. I get it. In retrospect, I get it. But at the time, I was just like, I was so frustrated and so pissed because it just seemed like everybody was out to get the project and kill it. And I got within a couple of weeks of working there, you know, Gary, you probably remember, I think we probably had maybe a third of the thing written. You know, we were doing, each of us had our nations we were doing. Sean was doing all the gods.
Eric, start with what happened with Roger Moore there exactly? Because he had been assigned
okay,
to do
so Gary, you're a good person to have on this because you can dig even deeper on some of these things. So originally, remember, Steve and I were working as consultants. So we were doing continuity consulting, essentially for a lot of that Greyhawk 98 stuff. So Roger,
I mean, you guys would have written the book essentially.
Well, yeah. So Roger was working on the campaign setting book, and the joke among those of us who eventually had to finish that was that it was the 1,000-page manuscript. You know, Roger was working with a mythical 1,000-page Greyhawk manuscript, and it was like so exciting because, oh my God, you know, first of all, Roger Moore, and then second of all, a new Greyhawk book. Third of all, 1,000 pages. Oh my God, you know. And so what ultimately happened was, this was shortly before I got the job offer to go work at Wizards, was Roger's due date came, and I think because of some family stuff or some drama that had nothing to do with work, what he ultimately turned over was, let me see if I can show you basically in the Living Greyhawk, or Living Greyhawk Gazetteer, but basically each country had like a stat block. So like there's the Grand March one, Furiundi, like right here. So it's stuff like the proper name of the kingdom, the ruler, the government form, the capital, the major towns and its populations, provinces, everything down to essentially enemies, but not including the overview. Roger had done that for every country in the book, or at least had gotten a real good start on that. But as for what was actually written, I think it was like Thronewood or something. I mean, it was like 2 or 3 sections that were actually written. So it looked like a 1,000-page manuscript, and it was essentially in some ways an outline for an 1,000-page manuscript, but it had fewer words in it than you would publish in a 32-page book. And so essentially, I think he just, maybe he was burned out or what, but what he delivered was not a publishable manuscript. And so at the time, Lisa had already hired me and I think Steve to write like sections of that book. So I'd had an assignment to do like, I think it was like an adventure hook section or maybe a magic item section. And
I think Steve was going to do artifacts.
Yeah, so it was just a couple of like almost appendices type stuff. And at that point, you know, Roger's turnover just didn't work. And so Lisa kind of was like, can you write the whole thing? And I'm not sure why Steve kind of wasn't involved after that point, but my short writing assignment became, can you finish this entire book? And then that's when I pulled in Gary and Fred Weening and Sean Reynolds, because I could not do the whole thing myself. Each of us had our own areas of expertise and interest, and there were whole countries in Greyhawk which like I'd probably never even thought about. And so, you know, I needed to get other experts involved, and I knew that with the timeline it was going to be impossible for me to do as well. So that's what eventually became this book. I honestly, you know, in retrospect, don't think most of the decision makers in the R&D department knew anything about any of this stuff. I think Lisa and the RPGA people were kind of just, I don't know, man. It was very clear when I got there that it was like some people knew about this and some people didn't. And so it was like a little rogue project. And of course, as a rogue project, it got involved with people's egos, and it got involved with, you know, other priorities in the department and things. And so to bring this back to Bruce Cordell, you know, one of the executives reached out to me, you know, probably on my second or third week at the company, was like, I need you to give me the manuscript that you have. We need to look at what this is. And I'm like, it's not done. You know, what the hell? It's okay. What are you going to do? Right. So I sent it to her, and then I got hauled basically before a tribunal that was if I'm just trying to remember, and again, before I start naming names, I understand now where these people were coming from, but at the time I was really frustrated and pissed off about it. But it was like, you know, Bill Slavisek, who was in charge of the entire department, Monty Cook, Jonathan Tweet, Skip Williams, so the main designers on third edition D&D. Bruce Cordell was in there. Those are the ones I remember. These were as high. I mean, I think Jeff Grubb was the only one who wasn't in the meeting, who was like someone I considered a superstar at the department at the time. So it was like literally like take a fan, put him in front of the Justice League, and then have the Justice League heaping scorn upon the fan for an hour about how this wasn't right and how this shouldn't have ever happened and all this other crap. And it was all negative. I left that meeting thinking, oh, this thing's going to get canceled for sure. And but the one bright spot in the meeting is somebody, I can't even remember who it was like trying to be a smartass and was reading out loud something I had written. I could probably find it. I'd said something about the you know. It's something along these lines where it says, Orth is but one world among many, separated either by the gulfs of space, the invisible ether, or the fragile veils of reality, or something. I think the original version of that had said something like, you know, Orth stands at the nexus of many realities and alternate worlds, or something. And somebody read that and was like, you know, this sucks or whatever. And then Bruce Cordell was like, I actually really like that line. And so that was the one sort of like life jacket I could hold on to in that meeting where I literally saw my entire career flash before my eyes. Bruce Cordell said something nice about my writing, and that made me feel good. You know,
awesome.
That was enough for me, but that was weird. And so that was the spirit. It was just constantly, you know, Ryan Dancy pulled me into his office one time. He was the guy who was totally in charge of D&D, and I think he was basically trying to kill the book. They were all trying to kill the book. And he was looking at the manuscript. And again, it's important to understand, like, third edition D&D was not done when we wrote this. I mean, this is almost all lore because there were no rules. You know, even the idea of the domains and stuff that are in there for the gods, that came in fairly late in the process. And so I remember distinctly, you know, Ryan Dancy sitting in his darkened office, his executive office, doors shut. I'm sitting in front of there in the glare of this light. It was like the Cardassian episode of Next Generation, you know, the torture lights are on me. And Ryan's looking at my manuscript, our manuscript, Gary, you know, and he's looking at it, and basically he's like, there's no rules in this. And I'm like, yeah, how could there be? We need this to come out day and date with the rule book so that we can launch this big campaign that's a cornerstone of your initiative. How could there be rules in it? And he literally looked at it and he's like, this isn't a game book, this is literature. And what he was trying to do was make me feel bad and admit that we should cancel the book. But what actually I heard was, you're calling it literature? You know, so these like
That's
moments
awesome.
of emotional safety in a time where I really felt like I'd been jerked around kind of from day one.
But that's
like,
one
hey,
of
we're
the
hiring you, but executive one was not talking to executive two. And so I'm sure everyone else involved was like, what a clusterfuck. And I get it. But back then I was the one at the center of the storm.
But it's one of the appeals of the book is that it's not tied to any edition. It's
it's good to this
history.
day. You know, it's a great thing
the
about
lack
it. You know?
of mechanics that makes it viable and ever eternally useful.
Yeah, I know.
Guys, you don't have to sell me on that.
Exactly.
I knew back then, you know, and so, but it was very unorthodox, you know, and it literally is a miracle that this ever came out. I cannot believe to this day that we snuck it through. And then once it was out, it was no big deal. You know, they were able to, and it was kind of fun, you know, Skip Williams ultimately kind of helped edit down. I hate this book, by the way. I was
just going to say, I always wondered why there was a light version.
It was done as a sop to the egos of the people who were hurt.
Understood.
That you know, so the idea, again, it gets back to this, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, but as a publisher, and now 18 years later or whatever, I get it, you know, is that continuity is a resource issue. You know, not everyone can be trained on this. The handful of people who really care about it are the most vociferous critics. Does it matter if they're mad because we messed something up? Wouldn't it be better if there was no continuity? So I think that what we actually saw, again, trying to look back at this as a 45-year-old adult and not as a 23-year-old kid or whatever. I think what we were seeing was a little bit of a generational shift at the time. I think people like Bill and some of the other folks who were 10 years older than I was, certainly. I think when you say Greyhawk to those people, they think of the 1980 folio. They think of just like a sketch that was essentially just a map, and it could be whatever you want it to be. There's no there. None of that stuff matters. It was all just a collection of proper nouns, essentially, so that you could have, you could say the land of Firiundi instead of having to make up a different land every time. But what Firiundi was, it doesn't matter. None of those people read the Marklands. None of those people cared about From the Ashes. Their point of reference was the original folio. It wasn't even, you know, the box set. It was the OG thing. And so I think that someone like me, who had been steeped in it the whole time, comes in and it's like, no, it's actually, you know, 4 box sets, and it's these things, and it's puppets, and it's the Rose Estes novels, and all this shit. They didn't care about any of that stuff, and they didn't know about it.
Oh, Eric.
Well, it is what it is. And so,
I understand.
And so that's where this comes from, is like, this is a version. It doesn't say Greyhawk. It's the Dungeons and Dragons Gazetteer. This is the like version that isn't going to hold anybody down to any tough continuity. It's not going to be intimidating. And again, I get that too. You know, the funny thing about this book is we put it out, and like every nerd who ever has published anything, you know, you're on the internet the next day and you're like, oh, do people like the book? What do they think? What do they think? It took people like 3 years to start asking good questions about material in this book. This book is a heavy read. This is a reference book. You know, this is not a book you just breeze through. And so again, I want to make it very clear, because some of those people might hear this interview and say, what an asshole. I get it now. But back then, I didn't get it. And so I still have bad feelings about this book. But one thing I don't have bad feelings about it was working with Skip on this, where Skip, I think, was fairly sympathetic. You know, I think he understood, but his ego was not huge. And so, you know, unlike some of the other people. And so he was like, okay, I got a job, which is to make that big thing into this small thing. And as we did that, we would go through all of the map and stuff. And he was telling me stories from the original campaign, and like, oh, B2 is called B2 because that's what we call Brian Bloom. And I didn't know any of that stuff at the time. And so that was a really fun experience. So eventually it was like, it built up into something that was cool. And now, you know, 20 plus years later, people still talk about this book, and I'm very, very proud of the book, but I'm almost more proud of the internal corporate bullshit that I had to deal with in order to not have that thing crib deathed, as I am any of the particular facts in the book.
I'm going to go.
Yeah, I don't think at the time when we were writing this that Fred and I were aware of just how much pressure Erik was under.
I kept you guys isolated from it because I knew it would break all of you. I had to keep the team focused on production because we didn't have time for that drama. So I sort of viewed myself as like the poop shield, if you will, that toilet paper, to keep all that.
I think Erik also learned that he kind of had to lie to me because I take deadlines as a suggestion, and I will keep writing forever if I don't.
Yeah, I kind of have that problem too myself sometimes. So it's
if I don't get it pulled out of my cold dead hands.
That's just editorial, though. I mean, that you know, it is what it is. And again, I'm proud of the book. I think we did a very good job. And I think more importantly, it was the first time anyone had really holistically tried to distill all of Greyhawk into one thing. I mean, even From the Ashes didn't really do that. From the Ashes was like a quick update of the 83 box set.
Yeah.
With some other cool stuff from the Greyhawk Wars board game. And so,
second question, did you retain the original draft? I can't find mine anywhere.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure I have all that stuff. I don't know.
No Google Docs in those days.
What's that?
No Google Docs in those days.
No.
No, I mean, there's no way, Gary. There's no way I threw any.
Burnt CDs.
I think it's I don't know that those files. I'll check while I'm in a rare quiet moment when I'm not talking here, but I'll check to see how early my stuff goes on this computer. But I have all that stuff. It's just probably in a internal hard drive that I saved when I threw away the rest of the computer. I'm not sure how accessible that stuff is, but I keep everything. I don't throw anything.
I agree.
And then the third thing, Erik, is how did Roger end up then editing the thing that he didn't turn in?
That's an interesting question too, man. That's I don't know. I don't. I think there's like I said,
was he the only Greyhawk person that they could find? Maybe.
No, I just think he was the available editor they had or something. Roger was working not a lot, but some people in that transition from TSR to Wizards had kind of a satellite arrangement, and there was issues where something to do with another member of his family. I don't want to get into it, but like communicating with Roger at that time was almost like communicating with someone in witness protection. Like he literally, only a few people were able to know where he was and things for a safety related issue, as I recall. And so he was off site. And so because of that, I think probably he was more available to do oddball projects and things probably than the people on site who had a very steady line of work that they were doing. So I think that probably had something to do with it. That was a trip to be edited by Roger Moore too. I mean, that was interesting. That was an interesting process.
And it was also great that you could get us 32 more pages back then, because the cuts would have been dramatic if we had to lose 32 more pages.
Man, I don't even remember that. I've had so many fights like that, you know. But yeah. I mean, Roger was great. I love Roger Moore. He's always been tremendously friendly to me. Every time I've met him, his son got into gaming, so he kind of fell away a while, and then he would come back to Gen Con with his son, and I'd get to talk to Roger for 10 minutes or whatever every year, and it's always a highlight to see him. I've had really, really good personal interactions with all of the sort of old guard people that I've come into contact with in my publishing career. Not always great publishing experiences. Some of those folks, let's just say the editors back in the day are some of the most unsung heroes of the whole D&D story. But every one of those guys has been really fun to get in contact with, and Roger's no exception.
Speaking of which, what kind of blackmail material did Steve Winter have to last so long?
Steve's a really interesting guy. I don't know. I mean, he's still kicking around. I've only Monty Cook a few years ago ran a it's probably like 10 years ago now, but he ran an OD&D campaign. I don't even think it was AD&D. I think it was OD&D, and I was in that with Steve Winter, and that was the first time I'd met Steve. He's a really interesting guy. I don't know if you've ever had him on this show, but he could tell you. I think he was the one who wrote that.
I'm writing it down. I got a whole list accruing off of this meeting.
Yeah, I can get to him because I'm working with him on. He's the editor-in-chief on the Como Press project.
Yeah,
been several years, and a huge one that I'm wrapping up or have wrapped up a little, but there's still some issues that we need to tackle.
Such an interesting guy, and I think
awesome.
He knows where a lot of the bodies are buried and stuff. He's been around forever. I think he wrote that Pluffett Smedger intro to the '83 box set.
Oh, I didn't know that was that involved. I need to get him on. Yeah, we need to get him on. Yeah, so I'll
he's a guy who probably has a lot more things in Greyhawk that are his than people probably know, certainly than I know. But you think about it, he edited the '83 box. That's a big deal, So what of that was from him and what of that was, Gary? Hard to say sometimes, I think. I'd love to watch that one.
Well, I got a list. I got a list accruing off of this. All right, I'm going to go back a little ways. 2 questions from the audience. I think Prenzi asked, where would you place the Spire of Nex in Greyhawk? And the other question was, Big Mac, from the Piazza asks, if Paizo had the option, would they do anything for Greyhawk in the future on DM's Guild? If it was over.
Okay. Let's hit that one at a time. What can you rephrase the first question again?
The Spire of Nex.
Oh, Spire of Nex. So Spire of Nex is a big mile-tall dungeon that is outside the city of Absalom in the world of Galarian. Pathfinder world. It's kind of my dungeon, if you will. I've done a few things with it. Where would I put it? That's interesting. I would, honestly, I'd probably put it as a weird edifice in the Cairn Hills. That's an interesting thing. If you look at
that sounds cool.
That's another tradition in Greyhawk. Put
it in the Cairn Hills.
What I would do is I would do like a reverse El Raja Key thing, because we had a deal with Rob Kuntz. We were gonna publish El Raja Key, his whole dungeon. That was our plan. We had been doing Mari Castle levels in Dragon, and he and James had worked very well together. I helped with the Mari Castle stuff in 112, but some of the later volumes or levels were mostly James and Rob. And I say James and Rob because what Rob would do would be kind of write them in, his language of first edition, or his version of first edition, and then James would kind of fill in some of the details and do all the stat blocks and stuff like that. And that team was working very well together. We had contracted Rob to do a hardcover version of El Raja Key. If you read in the original Pathfinder Gazetteer, where it's talking about the lands outside the city of Absalom, where there's all these siege castles, among the ones listed in the company of the Spire of Nex is El Raja Key. And the idea was it was going to be like this plane shifting edifice that would go from world to world to world. Cool. And there's a adventure called Seven Swords of Sin that we published. And that cover was the cover for El Rajaki. So we eventually, Rob just ghosted us and did not turn in anything. I paid him advance that I guess he just gets to keep. And so we never got anything. And that kind of, I still have a lot of regard for Rob and like working with him when we did, but that was a challenging situation where just no manuscript came. So we ultimately had to use the piece of art that we had commissioned for El Rajaki's cover to be the cover of Seven Swords of Sin, and subsequently have pulled references to Rob's adventure. That was part of the contract, was to allow us to reference it in our campaign setting, but if it was never going to actually happen, it's just no longer mentioned. But I do the same thing with the Spiral Next. I just have it like morph into the outside the city of Greyhawk, because I think it's like, that's the idea, is it's like a big dungeon. I mean, it's sort of superfluous in Greyhawk because you've got Castle Greyhawk if you need that, but that was kind of the idea. So I guess I'd probably just cheat and say put it by the city Greyhawk. What was the second question?
DMs, would Paizo ever do anything with DMs?
Well, I mean, look, it's hard to say, because on the one hand, you make less money on a licensed product usually than you're going to make on something you do yourself and control all the variables. The thing I think James and I would always really love to do is an official Age of Worms compilation. I think if we were able to publish an Age of Worms hardcover book, we would sell tens of thousands of copies of that thing, and it would be very, very successful. So it'd be interesting. I've not paid a tremendous amount of attention to like how the deal works with DM's Guild and all that.
I think you get 50% of the sales, and Wizards take 50. That's
a lot.
So I got to ask the question of like, if we were going to do it the way we'd want to do it, would it be worth giving up 50% of the money for it? Whereas a normal licensing or thing would be, I think nowadays for Wizards, probably more like 20%. So my gut tells me we'd be better spent putting that effort into something we control 100%. We did Age of Worms. It would be really fun to get to fill in some of the cracks and tie it all together and do new art and all that kind of stuff. But like, I'm honestly more about going forward than going backwards at this stage. So I like the idea of sometime in my dotage when I'm like, retired from Pathfinder, maybe I'll maybe do a Greyhawk module on DM's Guild or something just for the fun of it. But I'm so busy that's very unlikely. I'm 2 projects behind on Pathfinder stuff at this point. So
Christoph asked a question: how do you remember the genesis of the Council of Greyhawk?
Well, the Council of Greyhawk predates me, so it was already put together by the time I got on board with AOL. I can't remember when my arrival on the scene on AOL versus when the first OJ came out. The kind of the big thing in the first Orth Journal was the timeline that Steve and some others put together. I think Len might have even helped with that timeline. My take on that timeline was that it was great, but there was a little too much of people's personal campaign stuff in there. I was a much more canonista kind of guy back in the day, so I would have preferred that it be 100% derived from previously published stuff. Much more orthodox in my young age. But I don't remember what happened. I think there was certainly at least one era where Steve Wilson just disappeared off of AOL for like a year or two. But there was something keeping the OJ from moving forward. And so I got involved, and I'd been at the time, I was editing literary magazines in college and always wanted to be a magazine editor, as I said before. And so the idea of trying to help out sort of editorially was real enticing. And also because the Council of Greyhawk, as I recall, was kind of the impetus behind those weekly, I want to say Wednesday night meetings in the AOL chat room that just...
Yeah, Eric, technically I was the president of the council.
You were the president of the council?
I was.
Okay,
awesome.
So
and Fred was the vice.
Yeah, and Tom Harrison was involved, as I recall. There were a handful of folks. So my memory says that I just got involved and they needed an editor, and I was like, I'm an editor, and I think that's kind of how I ended up doing. Like, I think I did maybe issue 2 through 7, or I can't remember what.
People don't realize that getting one issue out isn't the easy part. I mean, that's the easy part. It's getting that second, the third, the fourth.
Yeah,
doing it over and over again.
Sure.
Especially because it's just 100% volunteer. We were all just doing it for fun, So
managing personalities.
Yeah. But it was great fun, and it was I had a great time doing it. We did some cool content. It was really neat. And again, it was all sort of, part of it was just to show TSR, like, there's a lot of interest in this, and there's people willing to write for this, and it's good stuff. And it was such a creative, we were all sharing campaign notes for the first time, not just for ourselves, but kind of for the first time ever, back then. It was a real revelation that there were other people even as interested in D&D as you were, let alone interested in Greyhawk and trying to piece I mean, if you go through some of those old, I don't know if people still circulate this stuff, but back in the day, you could get sort of digests of like the first year of Greyhawk, or the first 7 folders of the AOL thing. So much of those early days were just trying to figure it out. Like, no one had written the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer. No one had, people were like, oh, did you even know that there were these articles in Dragon? And half the people would be like, what? And people pulling stuff out of old old interviews with Gary Gygax about, oh, it's not just Orth, there's Yorth and Earth and Earth and all, and it's like, how does that plug in? And has anyone ever seen these Sagard the Barbarian books? And so it was like, it was I mean, I'm sure it still goes on, but back then it was just like, not only were you discovering new people that had the same interests as you, but you were discovering new content that you didn't even know existed prior to hearing about it online. And that was always really, really exciting.
Ta-da.
Yeah, there you go.
I bought it on Amazon because someone said that there was a map of Ratic in here, so I needed to get it. So
the maps in those Sagard books. I wrote a whole like long ass thing trying to mine all of the continuity out of those books and drew maps of it. That's like gone. I'm sure someone in the chat probably has it, but that was.
I cringe when I read that early stuff, because basically we were kind of assholes.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, it's worth keeping in mind. We're all college kids at that time. And
I mean,
but
we
all
were
been there. So
beating each other over the head with canon and trying to get our point of view across and have it become the dominant point of view on something. So
yeah.
I mean, Eric's first sign off, by the way, guys, was master of your puny reality.
That was so funny because that was literally, so it all comes together. Like, that was my first email account ever. I got my first email account in 1993 as a freshman in college, and it was like, put in your name and now put in like what someone will know you by, or your handle or something. And I'm like, master of your pretty, I just did it as a joke, like in the computer lab that day. Then I sent my first thing, this, Gary, you'll probably remember, I sent my first thing, which you friendly reminded everyone was about Rose Estes and how awesome the Rose Estes books were. Not exactly.
You didn't say awesome.
Anna, it's going to be funny, Anna.
You got the content of the message, if not the tone. And so, are you showing it right now in the chat? So,
you'll see.
I sent my first email or whatever, and it said that, and I was actually horrified because I didn't realize that would be recorded. I just thought that was a thing you posted. So I tried to change that as rapidly as possible. But I guess in a weird way, for that brief period where I was the main content person dictating.
Yes, guys, Erik did become the master of our
did kind of become the master of all of our TV realities. Yeah.
Yep.
But that's, I mean, God, there's probably some really embarrassing stuff in some
it's
of those.
time.
Oh yeah, it's some of it is so cringeworthy.
We all
but
did
it was great.
stuff.
We had Gary on for a while on Grey Talk. We had
that's awesome.
Roger and Sean and lots of old guys.
I learned the words fatuous and jejune from Gary Gygax posts on Grey Talk.
We learned that we were all wrong about the 9 demigods. So.
Well, we're going to talk about that, I think, hopefully in a second here. So, Erik, I have a big question for you. If we run a little late, are you okay?
Oh yeah, I'm here for. I'm at your service, sir.
Oh my gosh, fantastic!
Awesome.
Great to hear that. We don't have to stuff everything in as quickly as possible.
Only 6 o'clock here in the Pacific.
Oh right! I hope everyone's happy about it. By the way,
1 coffee down, and
you are on your way to smashing the viewer record tonight. It's close, so I really appreciate it. It's been fantastic.
Erik, Christoph just brought up Erik's old Rose Estes.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good example of sort of being a little kid at the same time as doing some of this.
Yeah, we would never use the term.
I would never do that today.
No.
So I had. I had been doing a real deep continuity. Someone posts the web archive. Great. So I've been doing a real deep continuity dive on that stuff just to see if there was anything worthwhile, and there were just some gems, and so I posted that, and again, not cool. I would not have done that now.
Your brother's page on the Minnesota website lasted for quite a while.
I know. I think it was someone asked that it be removed, and then we removed it. And so it just wasn't appropriate, and it, because it's not about hate. It was just about oh, this is funny. Mika shits on someone while he's and there's a whole subplot about masturbation. That seems pretty weird. And you know,
I'm
The
so
death of
glad
the
I'm
youth.
old enough that all that crap that I did when I was young is before the internet. So
yeah, well,
yeah.
there's still just a little bit, you know, and so yeah, embarrassing. I apologize to Rose. That was inappropriate. But
Oh, that's not just
it was the
sit
spirit of the day. It
sit
was the
tight.
spirit.
All right, I want to get to this.
Yeah.
I picked this up. We ran this in my campaign in like the end of 2017 before I was streaming, and let me just flip to this real quick, where I took a high level adventuring group and I had a small level feeder adventuring group. It was adventures number 804 through 816 in my campaign. We're up to roughly 885 now. And that's
Wow.
adventures, Eric. No, I've been playing. My campaign's 40 years old in Greyhawk, so I'm not sure if you knew that, but yeah. So thank you very much. So we have about 2,600 sessions we think together with my group.
I doff my Sleestack cap to you, sir.
Oh, thank you. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. All right, Robilar not being Robilar.
Yeah.
I want to hear that. I want to hear. I love the idea that he was
Yeah.
Bolaro the whole time. I guess it was because Morning Kanan didn't really understand what happened during the Rary incident, or what was their thought behind that?
Well, my memory of this was that Rob Kuntz himself was really upset
Okay.
about what happened with Rary the Traitor and how Robilar turned on the Circle of Eight and all that, and so that was, you know, again, I'd said an hour ago or whatever, I said that I treated that book as like, I think this is the last time I'm ever going to be able to write
Okay.
a fiction for Greyhawk. So there were a couple of things, especially as Rob is the co-writer of Castle Greyhawk, essentially, in the real Castle Greyhawk. I just thought that if I could maybe write a little bit of a wrong, it's like, it's his character. And if Rob says his character wouldn't have done that, Rob's right. And so
Okay.
that was kind of the idea there, was to do right by him, and you know, also play along with the idea of like a mirror universe, and also play along with the idea of there are these different sort of anagrammatic names, and you know, what's the deal with that, and so, you know, that was just a bit of fun that that tried to undo a wrong.
I liked it because you have the
yeah.
mirror, basically the mirror of opposition. Because
Yeah.
you have Tasha, and we actually have the lawful good version. They resurrected Ash so now we have a lawful good Eagwolf walking around in our game. So we got to figure that one out, right? Yeah. Here are my notes from this. So I loved it. The God Trap.
Yeah.
Freed a bunch. Who decided what deities were going to be placed in it? I know Zerokin's in there, and a couple.
I think that James Jacobs wrote that part of the adventure.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure that the gods that we picked were sort of what I interpreted as consensus choices by people like me and Gary and Fred, and we talked about that extensively over the year.
It was one of the most popular
and
topics
again,
over the year.
it was like one of those deals where I think, as someone said, Gary, you said, you know, once Gygax got involved, he's like, no, actually, the gods in question were Hextor and Hyronius. And it's like, well,
they're out now.
there's the draft. There's the drift between what happens at the table and what's in the books, because the books were very clear that these were like quasi deities or demigods, and you can't have like two of the biggest gods in the setting be trapped. It just didn't make sense. And so I didn't want to kind of, and Gygax was not working on the adventure. And again, explicitly, our knockoff version of Expedition of the Ruins of Greyhawk is not meant to be Gary's version,
right?
You know, and so I wanted to do something that fit within the continuity that we were developing, but that was respectful to the past. And up until that Gary sent that email, there were actually a handful of emails about it, as I recall, you know, on Grey Talk. It's like, well, this is what we sort of thought made the most sense given the official continuity. I was comfortable making those calls.
One more question. Whose idea was the homage for Isle of the Ape and Land Beyond the Magic Mirror is you have to go to those pocket planes to get the pieces in the one part? And I thought that was brilliant to go to go back to those adventures in this adventure.
Yeah, that was my idea.
I love it.
I can't recall if I wrote that section or if James wrote that section.
Okay.
I should have probably flipped through this before.
It's not. I mean, it's a huge. It's
hate
huge.
this encounter format.
It's kind of got a 4E format to it, which is the one thing. Yeah.
Hated it.
Yeah.
it did some good things. I mean, it made you think about the environment more,
Yes.
you know, in terms of like, can you build adventure, or how do you build encounters where really interesting things are happening because of where you are. But oh boy, anytime you have to write to a really, really tight word count, it limits your creativity. It creates interesting creative opportunities sometimes too, but I don't like it. So we really struggled with that whole bit.
Okay.
I think that I wrote this whole section, this Hall of Memory section, and all the mirrored universe stuff. The map looks like something I would have done.
Okay.
I think I wrote that whole section, but I can't quite remember. But the idea of going back to these, like, again, what do we know about Castle Greyhawk? Well, we know it has connections to the Isle of the Ape. We know it has connections to Dungeon Land. Let's put that stuff in there. That was definitely my. But I don't think, you know, if you had Jason or James in here, I think that they might also say, well, that was my idea, because it was not like any of us were against that. That was like, we were hired to do a Castle Greyhawk, so let's do Castle Greyhawk.
Excellent. Well,
yeah, I think at some point in your fandom, you come to realize that you're never going to get the real answers for all this stuff.
Right.
For me, I think that might have been like 1986 when I picked up that dragon where Gary said goodbye and said, "This is it. You know, I'm not going to be working on this stuff anymore." And I said, "Oh no, we're never going to know the answers to this stuff." And then we get a series of terrible products, and thinking it's just going all downhill.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
And then you realize, oh, look what Sargent did with this stuff. You know, I didn't agree with every choice, but I was like, wow, he really elevated the material, and so there is hope. There is some path forward, and who knows? Maybe your own ideas are better than anybody else's. But you might as well start writing them down.
I think as I'm looking over this table of contents, my memory tells me I wrote the introduction, all of the major NPCs, the Welcome to Greyhawk section, the Guide to the Free City of Greyhawk section, all the neighborhoods in the city of Greyhawk. I think I wrote the castle and dungeons like overview. I did not write the Tower of War. I did write the City of Thieves section where you have to go and steal.
I love that. Go into the College of Magic. I love that part.
I wanted that to happen because I was really inspired. One of my sort of secret touchstones for Greyhawk, and one of those things that I think I learned about and didn't know about until I got plugged into the online fandom was Robin Bailey's Night Watch novel, which was the novel that's the most Greyhawk thing that TSR ever published, except it doesn't have the word Greyhawk anywhere on the cover. That had a really compelling little cameo from Mordenkainen that has always really stuck with me, and that's what I was trying to echo in this section where you meet Mordenkainen. Again, it's Gary's character, so it's like, come on, you know, let's get some real homage in here.
No problem. To go to Mordenkainen's inner sanctum, and I had actually we have a group called the Grey Company. I had a third adventuring group come in, and they hired their specialist thieves to go with some of the Iron Brigade members. So I actually was mixing adventuring groups to do that adventure, and that was a fun one. And then get into Mordenkainen's sanctum and find all that iconic stuff in there. I mean, that was fun.
Again, it's like if you're obsessed with something for 20 years, you know, or 15 years, and you get to contribute to it creatively, and then one day you're like, I only have one more chance to do this. I jammed so much shit in this thing.
Yeah.
At some point, I'd been meaning to do this actually for years, and one day I'd like to do it. I'd like to do annotations for this book because there's so many.
That would be fantastic.
There's so many things. I mean, there's references to map makers in here, which are like a lizard man race that was published in like Polyhedron or Dragon, that are like completely random. There's so much stuff.
There's so many side quests too. There's a ton of side quests in there too.
So I would say that anytime there's something in this book that is like obsessively Greyhawk oriented, not just Greyhawk Ruins oriented, but like exceptionally nerdy about the history of D&D or something, there's probably about a 90% chance that was mine.
So Eric, I have an idea. One day when you have free time, you could do a little Earth Journal blurb about it.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Schedule me in for like 2026.
In his previous life when he was Savant Equander.
All right.
So yeah, here we go. The Chamber of Seven Secrets.
Yes.
This is like a perfect example. Let's just go through this really quick. I've
not
looked at it since I turned in.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 91.
91 to follow through, guys, if you have it.
So let's see. 7 stone pillars, each a different color, reach down from the 10-foot high ceiling in this chamber to its floor, which is thickly blanketed in multicolored fog. On each pillar is the oversized face of a smiling, round-cheeked wizard with his eyes closed. All seem to depict the same man, but he wears a slightly different expression on every case. In each of the 3 corners stands a mechanical man made of wood and stone bearing a massive metal club. And so there are these, you go to each pillar and then it asks a question. And this stuff is like, if I'm remembering correctly, this is like every one of these is some Easter egg. So it's like, what draconic creator deity emerged from the first void in the age before ages? Age before ages is something I made up to explain the time before history with the Wind Dukes of Baka. It's the kind of one chronology thing I hope actually sticks in D&D because I think it's a cool name and they need a name for that. But in the first void in the age before ages and shed blood in the shadow void to inspire all creation, that's Io the ninefold dragon. That's a long-term D&D thing. The orange column, potent magical workings such as a wish spell or the appearance of a god's avatar sometimes leave behind a specific magical phenomenon that is detectable only by arcane means. What form do such symbols take? The answer is shadow helices. I think that's from Artifact of Evil. They're tracking a shadow helix that's hovering over like a cairn or something like that.
Yep.
The yellow column, what 5 planar races are signatories of the Drayden Compact governing the transmission of pre-Great Wheel arcane secrets?
Tough one.
So the Drayden is from Mystara. It is a giant draconic worm that is from the previous incarnation of the multiverse and still alive. I'm fascinated by that idea. I love that idea. There's a whole plane of the abyss in Hordes of the Abyss that I wrote with James as well that is the insides of a Drayden, that the abyss formed around this giant dragon. So the Drayden Compact is a reference to that. So let's see, who are the races? The Realmani, that's from Planescape. The Keepers, I can't remember what the Keepers is. The Map Makers, that's that lizard folk or lizard-like interplanar race from an old creature catalog, I think, from Dragon. The Devotees, I have no idea what that is, but rest assured that's from some other thing in the Githzerai.
Yep.
The next one's boring. Who was the ancient Sul Empire's famed last mage of power? That's Slarotin. That's from the 83.
Beautiful.
That's probably from the folio even.
Yep.
Orth is but one of 5 parallel martial or material plane worlds. Name the other 4. Yarth, Aerith, Orth, and Earth. Earth needs no explanation. Aerith is Gary Gygax's world from the Dangerous Journeys game, which I could feel free to reference because TSR had sued Games Workshop and got all that material, so technically they have access to that. Yarth is the world of Sagard the Barbarian, and Uerth is
Real Earth.
something else. I think it's pronounced Waith. And it's all of these are from a Polyhedron interview with Gary Gygax talking about the Sagard books, and he just offhandedly mentions all these other worlds. So I wanted to canonize that. The violet column is about that's boring. It's about the Orbs of Dragonkind. So anyway, that's just an example of just like, I had an opportunity to canonize all this kind of stuff. I knew that it would probably be my last shot, so I just loaded so much stuff in there. I'd love to, like I said, you could annotate every one of these encounters has got some thing I pulled out of my ass.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Yep.
Speaking of that, Carlos Lacing, the great Carlos Lacing, asked, after publishing War Castle, who is Y? Is it Yog Sothoth? Who was it?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay.
There was that's again, that'd be a really good question for James because James is dealing a little bit more with Rob on that stuff.
Okay.
I think there was a time where I think it was supposed to be Yinoku, but I think ultimately it probably was something like Yog Sothoth or something. I think it drifted away from Yinoku. I'm not really sure. It's either Yinoku or Yog Sothoth. I don't remember.
Christoph asks if you could write a new AP for Region D, the adventure, whatever. Do you have a favorite place you'd want to work on?
In
Adventure
Greyhawk?
Either or. I mean, it doesn't say, so you could go with both.
Well, for Golarion, just where my head is at right now, I'd probably, if I was going to do it, I'd like the Galt, the world the realm that's been in Revolution for like 40 years. That's something we haven't really gone more into detail on. That might be kind of fun. And then the Next, which is the country based off of my big Archmage guy, that would probably be something I would do. Honestly, I'm doing a 128-page adventure called The Dead God's Hand right now. That's set in a hidden sanctum of the god Eridan, under the city of Absalom. That's the next late project that I need to finish when I'm done fixing up the Absalom book. Honestly speaking, I think when I'm done with that, I'm going to take a break for like a year. I need to not be writing anything. I need to
Just be
get the old head straight. But it'll be interesting to see what, if anything, I come back to after that.
okay. And Christoph.
Oh, but Greyhawk.
Yeah, Greyhawk.
What would I do with Greyhawk? I don't know. That's an interesting question. It'd be fun to do. So many good options. I love the Sea Princes. I think it'd be fun to do something down there. I think it'd be fun to do. Gary and Malden and I and others used to talk about Iron Gate a lot. It'd be fun to do something with Iron Gate.
How about
figure out the riddle of Cobb Darg?
Or get with Gary and do some Fiend Nights, or do something with St. Cargith.
Yeah, the Death Knights, really cool. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But cool. There's some places, Bandit Kingdoms, I really like. I've always wanted to do. I think I'd probably do this in Galarian if I was going to, but I've always wanted to do something like with the Viking sort of area. I don't know if I like the Frusty and the Schnei and all those words.
Yeah.
I shouldn't talk bad about that because Len's left, but yeah. So I think anyway. I think that's an interesting area. There's so many interesting areas. I haven't really once I sort of wrote Ruins of Greyhawk and kind of did a mic drop and walked away. I haven't spent a lot of time, reading up on Greyhawk or thinking about Greyhawk. So it's kind of fun to, and just in the last couple of weeks, to kind of open that chapter again. And there's still some. I tried to tie up all the loose ends, but there's still some out there that might be fun.
Oh yeah, but that's part of the fun to have the loose ends hanging around. I have one question that, since I'm so kind of interested in the cartography bit, that was a product back in, I don't know exactly, I think it was 99 or 98. That was an AD&D product in the World of Greyhawk campaign map, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting so much for that one. And it was a cover. It was I got it it was referenced in the TSR catalog. That was supposed to come out next year.
Paperwork.
And it had this part of this map on the cover, and I bet that the cover was simply just a mock-up to put in the catalog.
Yeah, the cover was for sure just taken from that image.
Yeah. So do you have any more information of?
Yes. Hold on, Anna. I'll be right back.
Oh, good one, Anna.
Awesome. I've been waiting for 20 years to ask this question, and now I have a chance. So this is awesome.
So, hey, Bishop, good to see you. I am trying to get at everyone's questions. Please, I am. I went way back. And hey, let's keep this rolling as long as Eric wants to keep chatting, right? So, look at this.
This, now we come in with goodies. Yeah.
So, this is a copy. I think Lisa Stevens has got the original.
Okay.
That's okay.
This is what it looks like. There it is.
Mm-hmm.
And to make a very long story short, here, I'll hold up a version. You can get like a screenshot of it.
Wow.
Yep.
So this thing was done by primarily by Kij Johnson, who was a editor at the time on the Greyhawk 98 stuff, under Lisa Stevens as the brand manager. And yeah, they were going to do this thing. And again, I was a continuity consultant on this. And so, Gary, did you work on this at all?
You sent me one, and I think we all annotated it and sent it back to you.
Exactly. So we had a whole bunch of people, and we went through, and it was like, oh no, Rel Astra should be a half a centimeter north of where it is on this map or whatever. So Kij did the map, and but it's an enormous undertaking, because what I think ended up happening was they filled in all of the sort of canon stuff. And then their canon is really uneven. So there are whole countries where all of a sudden, you'd have something like the Marklands areas, which got those beautiful detailed maps, which are just loaded with map tags. And then you'd have something like maybe the Yeomanry, which has like 3 towns.
Exactly.
So one of the things that Kij did that I wasn't a huge fan of at the time was just started filling in that stuff. And so what was coming from the official content, what was just something to fill in a blank spot. It was very difficult to tell the difference between some of that. And so there was a draft of the map that had a bunch of stuff on there that I certainly at the time felt like probably shouldn't have been on there. In retrospect, probably doesn't matter. But at the time, it was like, for me, it was like, this should be really about continuity. I think the issue was it was too expensive. I think once they put together how much it would cost, they just couldn't afford to do it, and so it languished. But I will never let stuff that shouldn't die. So the big 4-panel poster map that we did in Dungeon Magazine
Yeah.
Yep,
Mhm.
I have that.
is the same map. So
okay.
we started there,
Yep.
did the whole thing again, and I got rid of a lot of that sort of crufty stuff that was just to fill spaces. There's still probably some of that stuff on that map, but yeah, nothing ever dies. And so it turned into the what you can see right there,
Yeah.
that 4-piece Greyhawk map that we did.
That was going to be my
so it's
follow-up
kind of
question.
like, I think that maybe, I can't remember, but there was a Forgotten Realms map that we ran as a 4-parter before the Greyhawk one. And I think that may have been a similar deal where that was maybe going to be a product and then it got turned into a dragon thing. Because if you split it out over 4 months, you can do it a lot more easily. And we could also do it as an insert in a magazine much more easily than as a standalone product. And I think there's maybe some concern about how much are people willing to pay for this. And ultimately they didn't have to pay anything for it. But that was one of the most popular promotional items we ever put into Dungeon.
I can imagine. Yeah. And
And
I'm so glad that
it is
didn't.
the same map.
Yeah, I'm so glad that didn't came out, because that launched a new career for me, because I was waiting so bad for that map, and then when it didn't come out, I realized I have to start doing one myself. So that actually, if that had come out, I might never had.
Well, then I think that's probably the best side effect of it not coming out. We got Anna out of it. But,
well, it was kind of an interesting side effect, because that's when I realized, what the heck, I just need to start doing the map myself for my own campaign. And then the internet came along, and I was busy doing other things. I never thought that it would be a full-time job for me, but it actually launched my kind of getting into fantasy cartography.
Well, and Anna, I mean, your maps are so special, not just because of the artistic quality that goes into them, but because you yourself have an obsessive interest in detail and which side of the which side of the border should this town go on, and what does it mean when this thing is on the left-hand side of the hex instead of the middle of the hex, and if it's not for that level of detail, you can't do a project like this. So I honestly, and this is not necessarily to, I don't know if it's 100% a good thing, so please don't take this as like bragging, but if it weren't for me or somebody like Anna in a position to be able to do a map like that and to spend nights and weekends getting it right, and Rob Lazzaretti, by the way, the cartographer for that thing, was the same way. He was inspired by that original Darlene map. He wanted to do right by that. And so everybody involved with that project, which is mostly me and him, by the time we'd already gotten all this other stuff done for that product that never came out, other people couldn't have done it. It just couldn't have been done. You have to have an unhealthy attachment to the material, or you will bite off more than you can chew, and it's undoable. So so yeah, that was just a confluence of the right opportunity, the right people at the right time, and it's probably one of the things I'm most proud of, is getting that. And then we had Darlene design a font based on her own handwriting, and so we were able to get that
It's right up on top there, Eric. I use it, Greyhawk Gothic.
Well, but that was not that font, because that was never released as a font. And when you came on the Flanders Geographical site and said you did that kind of got me an idea. I need to approach Darlene and say, can you do it again? So I did, and I nagged her for like 3 years or something.
Well, it was weird because like Paizo actually bought the font from her.
Okay.
But then like we're not in the font business, so I don't even that was a whole I would have done that differently today than we did.
Well, I just wanted Darlene to do it, so I basically paid her the time to do it, and then we
I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did.
So now it's
more money for Darlene is great. Darlene, I think, is also somebody who is critical to Greyhawk. That map is, I mean, it's spectacular. I don't think it has ever been equaled in terms of it's got this great, and here I'll use my little Italian miniature version of it that I was.
Oh, you
showing
got
the other
one
day.
of these. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
but
Yep.
like this thing is the perfect mix of beautiful bold colors and the right information that you need to run your campaign.
Yeah.
Like I think
Yes.
this map has I don't think it's surpassable. You know,
No,
because you can do maps like you do, or like I did
oh,
with
yeah, but it's
Rob,
a different
which
purpose.
is all about
It's a different,
detail and
yeah,
all about,
exactly.
you know,
It's a, yeah.
yours all
Starting
can look
point.
real.
Yep.
You know, they're beautiful. But
Mhm.
just in terms of like doing what you need to do to light people's imaginations on fire in a box set,
Yeah.
they had it. They nailed it in one.
Yeah,
They
and
got
I
it right
think,
the very
yeah.
first time.
Yeah, and Darlene also has something that very few people in the RPG industry, even among artists and especially among cartographers, is that she's a calligrapher by trade, meaning she knows how to make beautiful pictures. And I think that's her biggest assets, meaning the calligraphy on that map that's what, in my
Absolutely.
opinion, what makes it stand out being exceptional. Because it's not standardized letters or fonts or anything like that. It's her, yeah.
One of my favorite things working at Wizards of the Coast was that there was an on-staff art team, and it was people like Todd Lockwood, Sam
Yeah.
Wood, Rob Lazzaretti, Todd Gamble was a cartographer there at the time, and I would often like sneak around. I got to see Lockwood's painting for the product called TSR Jam, which had a short adventure from each setting. And it was the first place where Mordenkainen lost all of his hair because I think Lockwood just wanted to look more like Fred Fields. That's the story that I was told. And so, you know, you'd walk in and you'd see, you know, these guys making this stuff, and it was amazing. And one thing that I can say for sure is that the cartographers, particularly Rob and Todd, and I think even Sam Wood did some cartography originally, or at least he was seated over with them. They had the original transparencies for the Darlene map in their kind of office space, and all of them treated that thing like the Dead Sea Scrolls. You know, that for people like, you know, for me and other writers, you know, it's the text, it's the book, it's the thing. But Anna, for people like you, maybe certainly for people like Rob, it was that Darlene map that made them go, oh, I can do this. This could be my job, or this really lights me up. And so, you know, for Rob Lazzaretti to get to work on that project was like coming full circle for him as well. And so it was just perfect.
Yeah, and now I realized after working on the Midgard setting for Kobold Press now for, what is it, like 7 years, and done several installments, and now I realize how enormously difficult it is to approach it from the outside, meaning I've never played in Midgard. I was an expert in Midgard, so that makes me even more kind of, I realized how difficult, because the Greyhawk was a hobby project, meaning I played and read the stuff for 20 years before I even started getting into it. And I had all the time and I can read, and I had all the research, meaning, but when you do it on time budget and on a monetary budget, and you do it from the outside, it's a completely different thing. So now I have way more healthy respect for anyone mapping a setting commercially to become a viable product, so to speak, or part of a viable product. That's a very different thing.
Tremendous amount of work, and just like a real, you've got to have the right artistic skills, but you also got to have the right thing going on up here to even be able to do it well.
Yeah, I see it as a kind of a technical thing and kind of administrative thing for half of it, and the other half is a kind of artistic thing, meaning what kind of fonts should I use, what the color scheme and stuff like that. The other part is, and most people don't realize, the research bit, meaning on my Greyhawk project, 80% of the time is research. It's reading, talking to people, and I couldn't do it if I didn't have, meaning 1,000 fans send me email over 20 years telling me, oh, that's wrong, that thing shouldn't be there, etc. And I updated the map every year, at least once a year for 20 years now. That has been coming, and corrections for 10 years. And just that, meaning 10 years ago when it was halfway done, it was crappy compared to now. It's much better, and I overhauled it. So it's kind of an ongoing. I guess it's like a rule system. It's additions and additions. So it's like I see now D&D 3rd edition in Pathfinder 2. It's finally becoming really damn good.
Yeah.
So I kind of, rule system needs many iterations to kind of age and become really good when you work out the cranks and stuff.
Well, and I think that again sort of speaks, just to bring it full circle, to the genius of Darlene's map, because she just got it right. Boom.
Yeah, and she
First
had
time.
nothing to fall back. Exactly.
I know she had no continuity to violate or anything.
Exactly. Meaning now we have like, meaning I have hundreds of fantasy maps to look at. She barely I don't think there was even an official Tolkien
I
map.
think maybe the Empire of the Petal Throne map.
Oh,
might
maybe,
come
yeah.
before,
But that was it.
But in
So,
any of that, yeah.
yeah. So that makes it even more remarkable that she made it so damn good. And I think, yeah, it's her artistic ability and her calligraphy in particular. I think that for me stands out to be just
Totally.
amazing.
I totally
But
agree.
enough talking about maps now. I'm sorry.
No, this is good.
Hijack
Yeah,
it. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
Eric said he could hang for a while. So anything you
Yeah,
want
man.
to talk
I'm
about is
stuck. You're
wonderful.
stuck with me.
Yeah, this is
I have
awesome.
one more kind
Go
of
for it.
question that bugs me a little bit. It's nothing about
Yeah.
maps. It's that I've loved Pathfinder. I've played
Me too.
in the Pathfinder rules for since it came out, and I've been an avid player. I don't run games in the Galarian setting because
Yep.
I don't know enough about it, and I'm lazy to go back to Greyhawk. But I played it. But the interesting thing is, when I started reading all the Living Greyhawk material, there are Pathfinders in there. There are a few Pathfinders in. So I was thinking,
Yeah.
is that a coincidence, or
What do you
is
mean
it?
by Pathfinder?
There are
Is-
a few modules that talk about Pathfinders, and there are even a couple of people that are in an organization called he's a Pathfinder and stuff. It's not detailed. It's
I
just
know.
mentioned.
I
Yeah.
know that when we were doing some stuff with the Seekers organization,
Yeah.
that was a similar. That
Yeah,
there was
maybe it might
similar.
just be a coincidence because I don't even
Yeah.
know the time frame or any of it. I was still thinking if there is
Yeah.
a connection, or is that just being in
No,
creativity
the
you get.
closest
Yeah.
thing I can think of is the idea of the Seekers. And again, it was like around the time we
Yeah.
were doing Mari Castle. So Dungeon 112. So
Yeah,
about
meaning
2
it's
or
like
3 years prior to the end of Dragon.
oh yeah,
and
meaning it's
Dungeon.
like almost a decade or yeah, it's a lot
Yeah,
of
so
time
we,
difference.
the idea of kind of like a neutral, adventurers guild kind of who doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
play by all the rules all the time and could be both an allied force and an antagonistic force.
Yeah.
That we started playing footsie with that idea a little bit with the Seekers, and then when we launched Pathfinder, I knew we were going to do a organized play campaign right off the bat, and so I sort of said, well, why not have that all kind of tied up together, so why
Yeah.
don't we have kind of an adventurers guild? That's not a good enough name. What do we want to do? And I think Jeff Alvarez and I were at the behind the counter at Origins talking about what are we going to do. She's maybe even the staff at that time didn't know the magazines were dead, but we did. And like, so what are we gonna call this thing? And interestingly enough, there was a very brief period of time where the post Dragon thing we were going to call Kobold, of all things. But we decided not to go that route, and we were like, well, what is it? What's the idea? Oh, well, it's adventure paths. So is there something we can play off of that? Well, what if we had this word Pathfinder, and then that means adventurer, and then we could use Pathfinder Society. I was sort of interested in a couple of things played into Pathfinder Society.
Yeah.
I was reading the comic book Planetary at the time, which had these planetary guides, which are written by these explorers, and that's a brilliant comic if people want to check it out. And that played into the idea of like there's a publishing element involved here, and I'd also just bought a what's it called? It's up there somewhere. I can't remember, but it's like an old 19th century explorer thing where people would write in like, oh, here's my story about braving the Arctic, or here's my story about going into this tamed part of the world or whatever. And some of those turned out to be hoaxes, and that whole idea really interested me about like people trying to publish exploits and all that. And so that's where like literally the thing got named Pathfinder, and I came up with the Pathfinder Society. Like it all was within like 15 minutes standing behind the booth at Origins. So I think there might be some thematic ties with the Seekers, but if that word's been used, that'd be news to me.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Here's
Wonderful.
some audience questions.
Yeah.
Pick a recent Pathfinder path or location or something that would be easy to place in Greyhawk.
Yeah, there's so many awesome adventure
And utilize in
stuff.
someone's Greyhawk home game.
Yeah.
Well, the one that we're about to launch in a couple of weeks here, which is the Agents of Edgewatch adventure path.
Okay.
You're members of the city guard, and the idea is you're exploring against the cults, and there's like a big World's Fair kind of thing happening. So it's a little bit inspired by From Hell, the Alan Moore graphic novel, a little bit inspired by Devil in the White City, the H.H. Holmes Murder Hotel kind of a thing. A lot of it inspired by Night Watch, that novel that I mentioned mentioned earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And because it's an urban campaign, and because it's less tied into the history of the city of Absalom and just more cool incidents that happen in the city, I think you could port that over to a City of Greyhawk campaign really, really easily.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I think that
Divers, even maybe you could do in divers.
yeah, you could. I mean, you could put it in any city.
Any other
Vermont,
big
okay.
metropolis. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I think that one would be a good choice. I'm trying to think. I would try to like stick away from some of the ones that are like War for the Crown, which is all about a specific country making a specific political thing. I wouldn't do that so much. I think Agents of Edgewatch would be a good choice. I think you could maybe, I'd have to read a lot of it again, but I think you might be able to map the Hell's Rebels and Hell's Vengeance, which is where you play evil characters, to the Great Kingdom probably fairly easily. That's
Oh, Gary, there you go.
I was thinking maybe you can also use the Kingmaker campaign
Kingmaker you could do
and use the whole mechanics and exploration and all that stuff, so to speak, and use that
Kingmaker
material and tweak a bit.
You could do in the Bandit Kingdoms, for example, because it's all about carving your own little kinglet out of wilderness. So.
You can take any wilderness area and kind of pick the hexes and start doing a hex crawl. And
I think those would be good choices.
A question for you from me. It's genius that you bring out the plastic, very nice NPC figures, by the way, with the venture paths. Without giving away any secrets, why are they such a much nicer quality than the D&D minis that are coming out at the same time? And who's...
I can't speak to that, man. I don't know. I can't speak to their process. I will say, I mean, I have a handful of the, they're made by the same company.
Are they really? Because they're so much nicer. They're
I think that there's again, and we've made... Minis are tough. There's so many different steps in the process. There's a factory process. There's the individual person painting it. Sometimes you'll get minis that are done by the day shift and some that are done by the night shift, and they look like they're done completely differently. There is kind of a luck of the draw element sometimes. I think that I can't really speak to them. I've seen beautiful miniatures on their side too, so that I'll only speak to my side of things, and that is that.
Fair enough.
One of the reasons why I think some of the Pathfinder miniatures look very good is really strong art direction on the front. So the material that we're providing. So I ran the first probably did the first 18 sets myself on the Pathfinder minis, and one of the things that's important to me as a miniatures collector is that creatures of a type look similar. And so, for example, with the old D&D miniatures that Wizards was doing back in the day, the first pre-painted ones,
in the early 2000s,
you'd have maybe there'd be an orc in set 1 and an orc in set 6, but they'd be different colored skin. They'd look really different, and there's just drift, within the style of the brand. And so, one of the steps that we've taken on our side of things is okay, if we're going to do orcs, let's do 5 or 6 orcs in the same set. Let's do an orc leader. Let's do an orc brute. Let's do an orc spellcaster. Let's do an orc, warrior. Let's do maybe a female orc. Any of those, do different genders and things like that. But do them all at the same time. So you're benefiting from the same paint that's been bought for that whole set, so they're always going to match the paint color. You benefit from a lot of times the same people doing the painting, or the same mass process doing the painting.
Smart.
And you're building everything off of the same meticulously art directed base images, and so I think that's helped us tremendously. Another thing that we did, and I'll say, it's a learning experience, but one of the things we were all very excited at Paizo to be able to do pre-painted plastic figures. And so for the first several sets, they'd bring in the paint masters, and then every member of the Paizo executive staff and our creative director and our art director, we'd sit and we'd look at each single one of, I think that this belt buckle should be painted a different color or whatever.
Wow.
And so
that's great.
I mean, partly because it's fun, you guys. Not everything you do at a publishing company is fun. And so when WizKids comes in hey, let's look at 40 figures, you're like, woo! And so, we all nerds and we're all minis collectors and stuff. And so, we all were involved very heavily. And so our approvals process is very meticulous. It's not, I think, very difficult, but it's got a lot of eyes on it. And the bad side of that is sometimes that is maybe even too much feedback, and so there was a couple of sets, I'd say 5 or 6 sets in, where we were getting to the point where we were speccing so many different belt buckles and all this other stuff.
little
that
variances,
you're
yeah.
actually we're actually asking too much out of the factory process. And so we actually learned to pull back a little bit in terms of what detail is important detail, if you will, and
Yeah.
the figures ended up looking a lot better. So part of it's just that you know, we've benefited from having on our side anyway, a lot of the same people involved from set 1 to set 24, and so we've learned lessons along the way. And so, but again, I can't speak to the other process. I want to be clear. I have lots of D&D minis that I think look fantastic. So
Just so you know, I use the Reclamation Knights and Cavalry and all them for my Order of Ulick troops, and the Grey
cool.
Maiden troops are fantastic as well for those general troops. I try to get them. They're hard to get now, but I try and locate them all the time. They're fantastic for plastic's good to have. You want to have metal for your PCs and monsters and stuff. Plastic minis are perfect for that. So definitely a great thing. All right, I got one more question, and I'm going to shut up the rest of the night. Let everyone else ask it.
Okay.
I think Pathfinder Kingmaker is the closest thing I've played to Baldur's Gate 2, which is my favorite D&D RPG game of all time. I think it's fantastic. What was the process in getting that put together?
You're talking about the video game, the Kingmaker computer game?
Yep, absolutely.
The process was we were approached by Owlcat, the company that ultimately made it, and they, you know, again, just like people like James Jacobs and I grew up with Greyhawk and Gary Gygax, and that inspired us to do stuff that it echoes that material and tries to one-up it in some ways, or at least raise up to that level. I think a lot of the folks at Owlcat had played those games, Baldur's Gate, you know, the early Fallout games, things like that,
yeah.
style. And I think they really, really, really wanted to do something that harkened back to that, but had, you know, the technology of today to do it. And so they came to us, and that was a pretty easy pitch, frankly. You know, we'd not the video game space is tough. You know, some stuff seems like it's going to be a huge success. It's a dismal failure. And but some of the stuff that they were saying and some of the people that they had involved just really resonated with us, and we got to meet them and talk to them, you know, over a couple of dinners and meetings and things, and really understood that their heart was in the right place, and that what they wanted to do aligned with what we wanted to do. And I think they did a really, really, really good job with it. Exactly the type of game that we hoped it would be. You know, they're now working on a Wrath of the Righteous game that's very similar.
Excellent.
The Kingmaker game's about to come out on consoles, so that's going to be interesting to see what that's like. Yeah. But yeah, you know, it's like Owlcat's a great example of just the right people, because they're going to put in that labor of love. They're going to want to keep iterating it, and they did. You know, they put it out, and there were some bugs and stuff, so they kept hitting it. They kept working on it. They kept, you know, talking to the community, and that's always been really important to my business philosophy. Is, you know, if you give people what they tell you they want, they'll probably trade you money for it. You know, and so people wanted this style of game for a long time, and they'd been playing Pathfinder and liked our brand and liked our stories and approached us, and it was a great match.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Yep. All right, so we're going to go a little further back in the group chat. Wu-Tang Piglet asks, why is WotC held on to Greyhawk for so tightly for so long, if you have any idea?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how to
like without allowing like it to open the DM's Guild. I think he means, or to.
I don't know. I don't know. I think it, broadly speaking, why have they held on to the property? It's like companies are not in the business of getting rid of intellectual property that could at some point make money for them, and so there's no real need for them to get rid of it. I don't think they're doing, I mean, outside of some stuff that they're doing with Joe Goodman, I guess, they're not doing a lot of like officially licensed stuff where it's like, oh, let's license Greyhawk to another company. They've got a really interesting strategy where they're just not putting out that much stuff. And so I think that if it's going to happen, my gut tells me it would happen on the DM's Guild as kind of a fan sort of created thing, which I think is probably the best place for it. I think, it's unlikely that they're going to want to hire 4 or 5 full-time people who are all Greyhawk all the time.
Sure.
It just, people have a bias toward stuff that's theirs. And I think that the new generation of folks are going to want to do things that are, rooted more deeply in the traditions of 5th edition. I mean, 5th edition, I think, is a little bit thematically less of a departure than, say, 4th edition was for a lot of people. So, I don't see any particular reason why you couldn't do a 5e Greyhawk thing, but they haven't done they did a 5e Eberron thing. I think they'll probably get to it, honestly.
That's what they've been. That was Merle said at GaryCon last year. On his seminar, he said we will get to it. So one way or the other.
But again, getting to it these days is like a book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't know what.
I think that if the expectation is, well, let's get the Marklands every 3 months.
No,
I think that I invite you to try the World of Galarian, because I just don't think that's their publishing plan right now.
Cool. Casey
But
Brown.
again, if they turn it over to the fans, then it's the fans' publishing plan, and I think that's I think they'd make a lot more money off of Greyhawk if they did that than if they just did one.
Yeah, if they get 50% of everything that a lot of other people will publish there, that will be a good deal for them without having to pay anything upfront or anything. So
But I'm not the right guy to ask about what their corporate strategy is. Never to D&D.
So Casey asks, the great Casey Brown, have you run any Greyhawks since the campaign in 2005, 2008? If you were to run another one in the future, where would you set it? And we may already have that answer as Sea Princes or...
the answer is no. I have not run any Greyhawks since then. I think, the whole split where... it's weird. You think you're doing a great job. Everybody's telling you you're doing a great job. You're excited about the stuff you're publishing. The magazine's selling well, and then they don't renew the license. Really was frustrating to me. And going over the course of about 6 months from all the people who were our friends and allies in the company saying, oh yeah, when 4th edition comes out, we'll get you guys early previews, and we want you guys to be involved, to then just never getting any kind of contact. Someone decided we were an enemy there, I think. And when people start treating you like an enemy, it's hard not to fall into that role a little bit. And so there was a real period for me of like real heartbreak and real, I don't want to over dramatize it and say I felt betrayed, because it's business. But, there was a brief period of time where my heart and my brain and my business could all be kind of the same thing, aimed at something that I loved for most of my life. And then all of a sudden that got, what felt to me anyway, like kind of pulled away for reasons that didn't seem to have anything to do with the inherent quality of the work that I was doing. And so there was just a period of time where I was pretty alienated by the whole thing, and things that had previously been truly joyful for me, brought up feelings of just resentment and frustration. And so I had to kind of throw myself into a new thing, or else I would go nuts, and ultimately getting to focus on something that was more, mine and more the work of my colleagues and less about dressing up somebody else's intellectual property. Felt better at the time. And so
Erik, a couple of questions along those lines.
Did
the metrics indicate there was any slip off or any fall off in the interest in Greyhawk towards the end of 07, 08?
I don't know. I the only metrics that I had available to me at that time was Dragon and Dungeon, sales numbers and things, and our numbers are going up. So the interest.
The RPCA looked like it was as hot as ever in that year.
Yeah, exactly. I think I think that what ended up happening was, I think 4th edition just kind of reset the table entirely. It wasn't only Paizo. I mean, they pulled back the Dragonlance license from Margaret Weiss. They pulled back everything. I think they were trying to consolidate everything and kind of start fresh. And because of that, I don't think any of it mattered. I don't think it mattered. It did. All that was immaterial. I think it was.
Did I lose sound?
Yeah, we lost sound.
For a second, I think.
Yeah, we lost sound for just 1
Can you
second.
hear us, Erik?
You're good.
Oh, we lost Erik.
Lost your sound.
He can hear us, but we can't hear him.
Yeah, we lost your sound.
Uh-oh.
Still.
Okay.
1 second. We're good. Take your time.
Yep.
Wizards strikes again.
Jay, work on this. Yeah, you're the wizard.
Oh, he looks like he froze. On and off.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
you're back.
I just restarted my internet connection, so sorry about that.
That's all right. No problem.
Yep.
Where did I leave you?
About 10 seconds ago, 15 seconds ago.
Okay. Well,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it was brilliant.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So another question I often get asked, or a meme that's out there, is that Paizo maybe made an attempt to acquire Greyhawk in that period? Was that even true?
Nope, not true. The closest thing was we tried to do that Age of Worms book that was kind of the first sign that they wanted nothing else to do with us. I think that, I think I may have started working on a pitch of like, hey, we'd like to license Greyhawk from you, but that would have followed the Age of Worms book, and that would have been more like phase, 3 of a plan that only ever got to phase 1. So,
Okay.
unfortunately, no. And again, it's once you've made that break, it's like, do you want to give a bunch of money to somebody else, or do you want to just be in control of your own destiny? And I think, again, for me, and look, I want to preface, I'm just talking about how I felt at the time. It's not the same thing as what the reality of the situation was, or how other people felt, or what. So, I'm sure that nobody involved with the decision of not renewing our license was like trying to vex me personally or anything like that. But I felt pretty bad about it nonetheless. And so, you get to the point where I think one of the things that we were feeling when we launched Pathfinder is, well, at least we're in control of our own destiny now. At least now somebody can't yank the carpet out from under us when we feel like we're doing a good job.
Oh, yeah.
And so there is a reticence, I think. That's one of the reasons why Paizo has not done a lot of licensing. We do our own stuff. We don't like license another company's property and do books based on that, because our experience is you give up a lot of control over your own destiny when you do that. Now we had tremendous opportunities working with Wizards, and again, maybe someday down the road we do it again, but it's certainly in that hot zone where we would have done a pitch for a Greyhawk thing. That was already pretty clearly at the bottom of the relationship, for reasons I still don't fully understand, but it is what it is.
Question number 1 for Mark. Mark created Mountain Games. Does Paizo do anything for Gary Gygax's day on July 27th?
No.
Okay. That's the answer there, Mark. And number 2, that's a Len answer almost. That was great.
Yeah, that's Len's.
Len's like, no,
like, nope.
Nope.
And that's it.
Nope.
Yep.
So the other question that Christoph wanted to know is, what made you choose the Aquander character?
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I mean, it basically comes down to probably the day after I read about Ivid the Undying being available in Dragon Magazine on AOL. I got one of those AOL CDs that were ubiquitous at the time, threw it in, and I think I was reading our Artifact of Evil that night, and I just come across the scene where the savant Iquander is visited by Curly Greenleaf and company, and there were a few things about it was a very brief description, almost a throwaway character, but it was something like he's a man who knows everything, and or whatever. There was something that appealed to me because I knew my interest was in kind of dredging up all this continuity and trying to make a sense of the whole. And so the idea of kind of taking on a persona as like a member of the Savant Sages Guild or whatever was something that I was quite interested in, and it just was serendipity that happened to have been the passage that I'd been reading maybe the day before or something, and I thought, oh, I need a name. How about this? It seems perfect. That's I mean, literally on my company's paycheck software that we have to sign in to approve people's vacations and stuff, I still go by Iquander. And Adam Daggle, and who participated in some of those early chats, was like, "Hey man, I noticed that your old AOL name is your screen name on there," and I'm like, "That's right."
That's
so
yeah, cool.
it is what it is. But that's where it came from. It's from Artifact of Evil.
Nice.
Awesome.
Which is still one of my favorite Greyhawk novels.
I'm sorry, because is that Bruce as well? Who wrote that one?
No, that's Gary Gygax.
That was a Gary? Oh my gosh!
It was Saga of Old City, which is really cool.
And you mean the book? I was thinking. I'm thinking of the Apocalypse Stone. I'm sorry.
Saga of Old City, the one that the opening was their shit eater. I think so. Anyway, there's so that's like Gord as a kid, and that's very City of Greyhawk oriented. And then Artifact of Evil is more like Cairn Hills and getting into the bigger plot. And then I really like Sea of Death as well, the first sort of New Infinities novel. And then they get a little...
Yeah, then they get so convoluted in weird out-of-planar stuff.
It's kind of like when you get high level, what do you do?
And stuff. I mean, it is what it is. It's fun. I enjoy it. I like theirs done will like insult people by saying they smell like flowers and things like that.
Gary, you got Annie, got anything to shoot out there to Erik? I know.
Well,
we're
I
keeping
think
him a
we
long
kind
time.
of, it's been a grueling, tough discussion, but it's been so much fun. This is, it is awesome. So, yeah.
Well, you're pulling
Well,
stuff out of me I haven't thought about in 15
Oh,
years.
there
So
goes the sun.
one of the
it's
fun
so
things we've
yeah.
been doing lately, Erik, is seeing some of the mementos people have, unique things that they've kept.
Yeah.
Is there anything cool that you have that you're like, this is in your permanent collection, you're never going to give it up?
Well, I mean, this little guy is shown a couple of times. This is pretty rare. This is
Oh
like
my gosh,
an
yeah.
Italian company did these little box sets when I was
Yeah.
at WotC, and so I made sure to get the Greyhawk one. It's got the little maps, all the books. That's pretty cool. Frank Menser gave me a die that was like a trial die for the original Red Box. I think probably his version of the Red Box. So that's pretty neat. Let me see. I think, okay, so I have 2 copies of this book. This is not my most prized version of this. My most prized version of this, that picture you were showing where I was sitting with Gary Gygax,
Yes.
was right about the time this came out. And I kind of slipped it to him and I said, Gary, I totally understand if you're not willing to do this, but will you sign my Ruins of Greyhawk module? Like, will you autograph it for me? And he knew I was doing it. I think I asked for his blessing or something. Like he was aware of it, and so he looked at it and he kind of flipped through it a little bit, and then he signed it, in big Sharpie marker. He wrote, "To Erik, a doppelganger?" ? Gary Gygax. So I have he signed my Greyhawk book, and so that I think it's at Paizo right now, but that's one of them. I don't know. I have a lot. I don't, as you can see, I don't really throw anything away. So I have everything.
Awesome.
Well,
I think one thing I wish I had, and Gary, this might jar loose a memory, but
Sure.
of course I've only been back to Paizo once since the quarantine, so I didn't exactly grab everything I needed. But one of the things that I still have there that at least through the magazine era I would still refer to every once in a while was this blue 3-ring binder thing that I called the Iquandex, which was my original timeline, my index to the City Greyhawk 83 box set, which I eventually put, I think, in the North Journal, and then photocopies of all of Len's Sewell Deity articles, all of the Dragon magazine stuff as one big sort of continuity. And I think it even had all of I did continuity guides for all the novels as well, which is where I got into that trouble with you and Rose Estes. But yeah, so I had all that in the Iquandex. So that I always feel like the Iquandex is kind of a little bit of an artifact that I'll keep.
Well, one of the things I'm kind of treasuring is this manila envelope sitting on a shelf over here, which is my draft of the speakers article that you took a red pen to, and it has all your notes on every page.
Oh my God!
I mean, they aren't all negative. There's definitely cool ideas, extrapolations, that sort of thing on it. And I don't know if you still do it that way, but it's a full editor's, retort, and I still have it. And
when I have time, I still do it. I don't do as much editing as I used to. I'm running the shop.
Well, I figured you guys do it all online now.
I don't. I still do red lines. Like I don't have any handy, but I much prefer to work by hand. When I'm editing.
Cool.
It's just easier for me. So.
That was probably going to be my last article in Dragon, if not for the forewarning you gave me that said that whatever you're going to do, your last one is coming up. So I instead switched to the Company of 7 article. So I said I'm going to touch that more than let the Seekers rest, but the Company of 7 was the last chance to touch something.
Yeah. Cool.
Question.
Oh, I have the original painting from Mari Castle in the other room. And I've got and that's by Wayne Reynolds, and then I have right over there. Here, let's see if I can show it.
Sure.
That's the
original.
That's the original Brahm painting for Living Greyhawk Journal #1. Yeah.
Do you have any? Do you have any of the shields? Casey wanted to know if you have.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me go.
Oh, he has one. There you go, Casey.
Stuff here.
We're gonna see a shield. Good call, Casey. Oh man, it's like those shields. Those shields were like the key to time.
The Scarlet Brotherhood.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So that I think Those were made, for the launch of Living Greyhawk, and so
Yep.
a bunch of the coordinators were given a shield. Jason Bowman's got the I use one. I've got that one. Yeah, that was really, really cool. That was really, really fun.
Cool swag.
Okay. All right. So here's another question: would you ever play in a Greyhawk game if someone offered you to play in one?
Of course, yeah. Depends on who the someone is and then the timeline and stuff. But yeah, insofar as I have time for any gaming anymore, I don't have anything against Greyhawk. I still love it. I'd be happy to.
I'm going to ask this now. I was going to ask this
Nerd.
at the end of the show. So, virtual Greyhawk Con, I have a Greyhawk All Stars game. It's a Saturday night. I'm inviting you and Gary to play together.
Okay, I'll play. What system?
Old school 1E2E.
Okay, yeah, I'll do it. Sure.
Awesome, Gary. Eric's playing
in October sometime.
Yeah. Yep. It's during virtual Greyhawk Con.
Of course.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah. Gary. Eric's playing.
The question was.
Yes, I just got to make sure it works with whatever we're doing that month. But yeah.
Okay.
The question, would you play with someone in a Greyhawk game if they ask? The answer, yes. I just got asked, and yes, I'll do it.
Awesome.
Better not be the night before a test, before the kids have a test.
It's a Saturday night.
Oh, okay. That might work.
Come on, guys, you get to play together, and Luke
you can move it to whatever night. So yeah.
Luke
Who else is in the game?
Luke may be in the game. Ernie Gygax may be in the game. Someone from Troll Lord Games is going to be in the game. Probably either Chuck Cumbell or Steve Chenault or both. So Anna may be in the game.
Now you
I wanted to wait and ask you too, because we're 2 months out, and I wanted, when this show came on, to ask you both, because I think it would be an awesome game. So, and it's my tabletop 1E2E style, and you get to check it out. And Gary knows about the basement already, so you have to check it out. It's all remote. We'll play 1E2E miniatures. Play something right. We'll probably be in the Karen Hills there. Ooh. So awesome. Yeah. All right, thank you.
I'll be sure to play a Worshipper of the Green Lady or whatever that thing is.
Of Ouija. It's according to Len, it's not Ouija, it's Ouija.
Yep.
Well, how about that?
That's so cool.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I have a hard time with that too, but it's
Yes. So that's great. There we go.
Yeah.
Anna, ask something away before we're gonna wind this down.
I was just going to say we usually have shout outs at the end and so on. So Eric, anything you want to shout out, because Paizo has so many cool things in the making and stuff.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, we're gearing up for Gen Con in a couple of weeks, so we'll be doing some stuff there. We'll be doing a lot of Pathfinder Society games people can check out. In addition to some ticketed sign-up stuff, there's going to be some walk-up demo type things. Walk-up, in the virtual world, you can go to paizo.com and get more information for that. I think right now the thing that would be really cool is for people to check out humblebundle.com, because we've got a big Humble Bundle right now, which is you get to decide how much you want to pay. We've got most of the second edition Pathfinder stuff up available as PDFs, starting at like $5, going all the way up. If you pay $30, you can actually get a print edition of the Pathfinder second edition core rulebook. So if you've been kind of curious about it, but maybe don't want to pay full price or whatever, this is a great way to check it out. And then as part of Humble Bundle, you can decide how much of the money that you put to it goes toward charity. And so this time around, our charities are sort of Black-oriented charities. So we've got the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, we've got the National Urban League, and then a local charity called the Carl Brandon Society, which is all about increasing representation of people of color in the sort of top tiers of science fiction fantasy publishing. So great charities, and you can check that out. And it's a bunch of short stories, a bunch of the core rules. It's great. Never been cheaper and easier to get involved with Pathfinder. So give that a shot.
Awesome.
Definitely worth it, and a worthwhile donation. So Asher and Casey both linked it. So there you go. Great opportunity to get some great PDFs there. Definitely. Wow, this has been great. So
absolutely fantastic.
If you're first time meeting you, Eric, if you're like this, man, you really can converse. I mean, for a long period of time.
It's hard to get me to shut up.
It's wonderful. We love it.
This has been wonderful. So, all right, here's a list. I got Roger Moore, James Jacobs, Jason Bullman, Bruce Cordell, Steve Winter.
Yeah.
we got to get them all on the show at some point.
Yeah.
And I would
Yeah.
love,
I mean, I could talk to Jason and James and suggest that they,
well,
I work with them every day.
that would be
Yeah.
The rest of you are on
fantastic.
your own, but
Okay. I
I
will
think
link.
these would all be good people for sure.
Yeah.
And we'd love to have you back, even to hop in and ask them questions like Gary has doing and Anna's doing. Have you guest host anytime for certain topics, even for a Living Greyhawk discussion on a Wednesday night. So, I know
Yeah,
you're swamped.
No, I mean, whatever. Now we've popped the seal here, so
Yes.
I'm happy to come back. And you guys have been
Yeah.
very welcoming, and this has been fun.
Oh,
Again,
Well,
I haven't really thought about a lot of this stuff for almost 10 plus years. So sometimes just the questions knock loose some really mostly good memories, and it's been really, really fun. So
yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
what do you think about the future for Greyhawk? I mean, I'm just going to be general. I mean, we're trying to, Gary, Christoph, there's a ton of people, Carlos, Anna, Brian Blumklotz, Mike, all the bloggers. I know I'm forgetting people. What do you think?
Carlos, yeah,
We've got a
yeah.
community here. We're trying to build it, and that's what
I think that's key. I think that's, when we pulled this thing out of the abyss, it was by forming online communities and just sharing things that we loved and the mystery of it all and trying to piece it all together. And I see, that's what we're doing now, and it's interesting that things that I and Gary and others were doing at that time are now become part of the mystery, and we got to try and elucidate on some of that as well. But it's like, that's how you do it, and I think, again, we were talking a little bit about, just the ease of access of desktop publishing means that printed stuff like the Orth Journal is better than it's ever been. Certainly Anna's digital tools on the map side have gone. I mean, that's like made 30 years of progress in the 10 years I've been paying attention to it. So that's more beautiful than it's ever been before. Stuff like this, when we were meeting back in the day, it was all chatting. I mean, I'm a very, 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 very fast typist because those Council of Greyhawk meetings were being charged by the minute back in the day on AOL. So you had to hammer that stuff out as fast as possible. But now we can just have, more open conversations where we're looking at each other and there's chat and people can, so technology is really helping a lot. And I think that if the key to Greyhawk having even like a real quasi-official thing, I think is going to be unlocking that stuff in the DMs Guild if they ever allow that. But in the meantime, there's all kinds of people who are doing stuff that's almost there. I mean, there's lots of stuff with the file numbers slightly, sanded off. Rob's been publishing his levels of his thing. Joe Block's got his Castle of the Mad Archmage. There's, in a way, it seems like Greyhawk is as big as it's ever been, in any of the periods of time where it wasn't being actively published. And I don't know that WotC's or really anyone's publishing approach today is similar to where it was in the 90s, where you'd get a dozen books a year or something like that. So I don't know that it's really reasonable to expect that level of support anymore. But if that can be somehow uncorked for the fans to take over, that's when this thing's really going to fly into the next level, I think.
What do you think there, Gary? What do you got?
64-page Death Knight's book. Make it happen, DMs Guild.
Yes.
Oh man, he's holding on that. He's holding on that with just like I know Carlos is Fireland too, and Carlos, and it's it'll be brilliant if that gets released as well. Let's hope one day that we
one way or the other.
So Erik, recently your Backloonish psionic stuff has come up a lot in chat.
Oh yeah.
And have you ever given that a second thought since you wrote that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I thought a lot about it back in the day. So in the first couple of years after I wrote that stuff, I did think a lot about it. I developed some of that stuff for a old, so here's someone here might actually have it, but I did a AOL play-by-post campaign that was called Forging the Balance is what it was called. And it was in their old, play-by-post things. The archive of that, I God only knows what happened. I think I have a printout of it somewhere. But I put a ton of work into that, and a lot of that stuff was somehow tied into the background of that campaign, and so I'm sure there's other little bits of that floating around somewhere. But I literally haven't thought about that since a week after I wrote it, probably.
Well, don't be surprised if you get a few homages written based on your own work. So we're old enough now that that's happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's weird.
Yep.
It's weird. We were babies back in the day, Gary.
Yeah, I know.
Little Boston babies.
So I know one last question. I think Bloodwild, and I apologize, Bloodwild, that I missed it. Did you publish Gary's last novel, or did you edit that?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
We
Okay.
did in our Planet Stories line. When that picture you keep showing with Gary doing the signing, he was signing some of his Dangerous Journeys novels. So
Okay.
we weren't able to do the Greyhawk novels. I kind of liked his Setni Inhotep novels. It was kind of a consulting detective, ancient Egyptian sorcerer kind of a guy. You know, Gary's writing style, some people really hate it. I like it. I enjoy it. And so yeah, we did his 3 novels that he did for that, and then there was a 4th book that had never been published, and we published that. The name is eluding me at the moment, but it was the 4th Gygax book that we did for Planet Stories. Someone's probably got the name in chat. But yeah, we did.
Seeker, I'm sorry. See, I'm trying to keep all in chat. Chat's going really fast tonight, so it was Seeker of Oblivion that asked that question. I'm sorry, Seeker, but thank you for that question as well. All right, so Anna, you want to talk about a little bit what you got going on real quick?
Well,
Yeah, Infernal Sorceress is the name of
it. Excuse me?
Infernal Sorceress is the name of it.
Infernal
I wasn't trying to call Anna an Infernal Sorceress.
yeah, well, that's
okay.
awesome.
That's not a bad
That's
name.
a compliment. Yep, that's awesome. Yep.
Yes.
Well, the Atlas is on hold for a bit, so after working on it for a month, the Atlas is I've taken my big map and split it up to pieces so it would be available for print, so people can download the PDFs and make prints for it and print it. And so I've taken a break for about a week. So I'm working on the campaign, my campaign map, next campaign map. So it's a very, very detailed map of Shieldlands, and I'm saying very detailed. I'm talking 5 feet per pixel detailed for my campaign stuff. So that is coming along fairly well, and I'm writing a first blog post that will come out next week about the technical side of it. This will not be the campaign, any of the story arcs or any of that way. It will be a map technical heavy blog post, because I haven't had that in quite a while. It will come to my patrons, and it will be on my website too. The campaign stuff of this will be presented on the Greyhawk Con. Then I will talk about the campaign side of things and show some of the maps and some more in detail. And I'm also going to continue the work a bit on the Worth, the kind of that Maldin kind of, he went ahead of me and did some awesome cool map of Earth and took a globe. And so I'm going to refine that more and dig into climate and stuff like that as a kind of one of the groundworks for working on the next generation. Because what I've done, I've done the Flanice map, and I'm going to start doing it again from scratch using 20-year-old more modern technology. So that's the idea. So these are 2 projects that will tie into future mapping, so to speak. And I'm also learning a whole bunch of new tools, so I will write a bit about that. So it will be from being more about the fluff and the setting. This will be a month that will come out some map technical stuff, and then we will come back for Greyhawk Con with the kind of the content side of it again. So that's basically what I'm up to. Yeah.
So wow, what a night, huh? Crazy.
Yeah, I'm
crazy.
I didn't even know what to say. My own plugs. I'm so this is so awesome. Yeah.
All right. Well, wait. Anna knows this. Here we go.
Yes. Yeah. Come on. I've been waiting for it the whole evening.
I gotta do it. I gotta do it in the right order here. All right.
Okay.
Just sit tight. Oh, I must have a crystal ball. All right. So Wednesday night's our next show. Wednesday night, Legends and Lore.
Yeah.
We're going to do the Backlunish West. We're going to talk about Mike's All. We're going to talk about Zeef and Ekbeer and go through all
the Paynims and stuff like
absolutely.
that. Yep.
So yes, I can. So can you Facebook Messenger me a mailing address? Christoph wants to send you an OJ, an Earth Journal. If you would do that in Facebook Messenger, Eric, would that be okay?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, excellent. No problem. So that will be the first one we do on Wednesday. this starting off this week. We'll turn it down. We had so many great guests. We're gonna talk, get some content going. Thursday night we will continue our Shadows of the Halfling Hall out with the Narwhal Headhunters. There you go. Some more canon I'm utilizing out of Narwhal in the town of Newbriar. I kind of implemented a Troller Games adventure, our latest sponsor, into that area, and that's going very well. First level adventure. We'll continue that on Thursday night. Next Sunday. So, Gary, I really appreciate you coming back on the stream next Sunday. Thank you so very much to help me interview my next big guest next week. Next
I did
week,
agree to that.
we have Rose Estes on the show.
Are you kidding? Are you kidding?
Look at how the van turned. Yes, I'm joking. That's a joke. But I just knew you guys said, all right, so Rose is not coming on the show.
And he did this one sent before we had the show. He just said that I need to make a joke. So,
no, next week. All right, next week, Connections bring Greyhawk to life. So I'm going to have John Birchfield, John Blue Box, and I are going to talk over making your connections between characters, adventuring groups, and even between streams to add a little breathe that life into your Greyhawk campaign. I think it'll be a great discussion with John. John's really taking off on his Tuesday night Greyhawk Awakening game, which is at 6 p.m. You like that? At 6 p.m. Central. 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. That it starts, and it's going like gangbusters. And it's in my version of Greyhawk, and we're doing crossovers with NPCs and all sorts of things we're sharing, and we want to discuss it in depth. So that's what we're going to do next week. Yes, Seeker, that was a joke. I just couldn't help myself. I wish I could see what Gary looked like on that one. So Gary's deadly silent now. So, and then I am off the week after. I'm on vacation, but our next Saturday night special is Saturday, August 15th, where we continue our Living Greyhawk. So I'm DMing for the Living Greyhawk guys there, Erik.
Cool.
Joe Selby, Casey Brown, Andy McCulloch. Anna's joined the group because when Anna's in the group, the audience doesn't beat them up as much with cheers against them. So
yes, I'm an honorary LT member.
Susan Thurgood, Vernon Vincent are all in and playing in this game on Saturday night. It may be a good one, Erik, to check on in a vid, a Living Greyhawk one to see what you'd be getting yourself into in October. But I'm a minis tabletop 1E, 2E guy. We'll work out some characters and all. It's going to be a blast. Thank you so very much for that. So that's what's up. What a night. What a show. I hope you all enjoyed this. Erik, I can't say thank you enough. I'm humbled.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so
Hey,
much.
Jay, thanks for the invite. And I will say, if you want me to do a little reconnaissance, I'll say watch some of my guest appearances with the Glass Cannon podcast, and then you'll see what you're in for by inviting me, my hammy ass, onto your game.
I can't wait.
My friend.
Yeah.
I cannot. I think that it's going to be so for Virtual Greyhawk Con. One real quick, we have some highlighted streams, and I finalized this today. Let me go over it real quick. This is Friday. Mike Disney, Carlos, Will Wicked Studios, Anna's Greyhawk campaign, Blue Box, Troll Lord, Dragons in the Dining Room all have highlighted streams on Friday, October 2nd. All right. The big one being Anna's going to do her own Greyhawk campaign and discuss it, her own she does on the customized map. Saturday, that's the big game. Saturday night, 7 p.m. EDT, the Greyhawk All-Star game, and I put in a couple guests now. But we got Nightheart Gaming. We have the ever mysterious Tim with Carlos playing. DMing his Barbarians Only campaign game, and Anna's in that game too. And then Sunday, look, the schedule's already full. Skagith, the Salamore Rangers, that's one Gary likes there. Blue Box again, Wily Hobbit, and then our Gabbin show here to wrap it all up. And that doesn't count all the signups for regular games too. So, and we're 2 months out, and we already got a full lineup. So thank you all so very much for that. Wanted to put that in there. All right, who are we gonna raid? You know what? Has Phantom gotten to affiliate? He's got. Oh man, he's gonna die when he sees how many people are coming over to his stream tonight. We're gonna raid.
Yep.
We're gonna raid Phantom and help him out get to affiliate. Okay. So sit
Okay.
tight if you can a little bit, Eric, and we could just BS if you so choose
Yeah, and
afterwards.
thank you so much to everyone who's been on the show, and chat
you.
has been wild tonight. It's awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rethix. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you all Wednesday night.
Until the star break, my friends.
Awesome. All right, here comes raid. Gonna set raid up. Did I hit the right button? There. Yeah. I always hit the wrong
Yeah.
button.
I think you did.
Oh.
Yeah.
Raid. Starting it up. Yeah, please go over and give him a follow. He's trying real hard to get affiliate by Greyhawk Con. He's going to be DMing some stuff. Thank you all. Nice amount of viewers. 10 seconds. Make Phantom happy. That's a good way to say it, John. Should be off. Raid
Yep.
should be on.
Yep.
All right.
Perfect.
Awesome.
That was awesome, Erik. That was
I
so
think-
much fun.
Enjoyable. I could probably go for another 4 hours if I needed to. This has been really interesting to think about some of this stuff. You know, I hope I'm
Yeah.
not. I hope I don't